at 419 capital F Fulton. I don't know. Paul, we're going to get Paul Peterson just a minute. Do we have a binder? We'll ask Mr. Ross. Did you get us a binder? Oh, good. Oh, decent. It looked weird for some reason.
We'd like to call this evening's special meeting of the Peoria City Council to order. Madam Clerk, could you take the roll, please?
Mayor Artis.
Here.
Councilmember Ali. Councilmember Sear.
Here.
Councilmember Grayeb. Here. Councilmember Jensen. Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Montalongo. Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Euler. Councilmember Riggenbach. You have a quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. A notice was received by a member of the City Council in accordance with rules established in ordinance number 16142, and the member will be deemed authorized to attend the meeting electronically unless a motion objecting to the member's electronic attendance is made, seconded, and approved by 2/3 of the members of the City Council physically present at the meeting. If no such motion is made and seconded, then the request by the member to attend electronically shall be deemed approved by the City Council and the presiding officer and shall declare the requesting member present. Councilmember Rick Regal is at the Livable Cities Conference in Portland this week, and he is joining us by phone. I'm seeing no disagreement on that, so Councilman Rick Regal will be considered present. Councilman Rick Regal, are you there? Or maybe he won't. Did he say something?
No. Councilmember Ruckriegel, are you present?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like everyone to please join us and stand for a moment of silent reflection or silent prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Of course, we would like to keep the family of our state's attorney, Jerry Brady, our clerk, Steve Sonemaker, and also Dr. Adamson, who have all recently passed this week. We'll keep their families in our thoughts and prayers this evening. Madam Clerk.
Our first item is 19-173. It's a request to receive and file a presentation from the Downtown Advisory Commission.
Well, we'd like to welcome all the members of the Downtown Advisory Commission who are with us this evening. We know they've been doing a lot of really good work, and we appreciate them coming down to give us some updates and some recommendations and solicit feedback. So, Assistant Manager Rattler, are you going to kick this off for us?
Sure will.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I just want to, again, echo the mayor's comments of really thanking the Downtown Advisory Commission for coming down tonight. And today we're going to spend a moment meeting the DAC members so you can start to recognize them a little bit, and then talk about 3 recommendations they want to bring forward in terms of prioritizing wayfinding, the engagement of riverfront activity, and looking at planning and the combined sewer in plans. I'm just going to ask really quickly as I call out the names of the members of the commission, if they could just raise their hand briefly so that we can associate some names and faces really quickly. First, Mark Misselhorn, Vincent Boyle, Alma Brown, Paige Dodson, Kevin Evans, Ray Lees, and then John Jenkins and John Knighty are not available tonight. And as you know, I'm Deborah Rattler. I'm the staff liaison for this group. I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
Let's try it now. That's good. I'm glad you can all hear me. That's great. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mr. Mayor and Council. I wanted to, first of all, just tell you a little bit about the Downtown Advisory Commission. This is a relatively new, but time sure flies, commission. The mayor and then council formed this about 6 years ago with the idea that there was no dedicated commission in the city that was focusing solely on everything downtown, with so many good things happening, so many things on the horizon, and the importance of downtown to our entire city and our entire region. That was a very important thing to form. So the purpose of the commission that stated, we do serve as an advisory board to the mayor and council, to you. We advocate for the downtown area. We listen to and cooperate and coordinate with downtown businesses, organizations, and residents. We concern ourselves with quality of life and business issues downtown. We learn from other communities and leverage those successes, looking for good examples. We help to shed light on businesses that are here and promote new residential opportunities and visitors. And we act as one of the voices of the downtown Peoria. The key component is that this is a public commission. Our meetings are the second Thursday of each month at 4 p.m., so they're publicly noticed and public meetings, as opposed to, for instance, the Downtown Development Corporation, which does very important things. They are not subject to Open Meetings Act, so a lot of their work is more deal-making. And many of those things, as you can imagine, are not necessarily appropriate to have in a public forum, but we have downtown stakeholders and other representatives typically at our meetings, and we deal with a lot of important things for downtown Peoria. The other commissions, and there's numerous other commissions that the city has and other cities have. This one, the Downtown Advisory Commission, is unique in that we don't simply have an agenda before us. I had served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for several years, and that commission, for example, has cases brought before it. We review them, we make recommendations, and about 2 weeks later, the City Council acts on those cases. The Downtown Advisory Commission doesn't have such an agenda or handle specific cases, for example. So we are looking always to deal with timely issues. We shed light on new businesses. We highlight things downtown. We always have the Downtown Development Corporation and Michael Freilinger give updates and so forth. But this year, under the leadership of Assistant Manager Deborah Rattler, I think it's been a very, very good move to. We wanted to see how can we be more useful as a commission to you, the council. How can we bring forth information that's going to help make a difference and move things forward in a more positive manner? And so what we're doing at this particular meeting tonight is the first step in that. The last several weeks, our commission has gotten together and we reviewed a number of priorities, things that were attainable, things that we could bring forth and make recommendations on strategic level, a policy level to you, the council, so that we can help move things forward. And that's what we're doing tonight. This is the first of what will be future meetings like this, where we can meet face to face, and I think it's going to be much more effective and much more informative for you, the council, in this fashion. So that's the purpose of tonight, is to present the three recommendation items that we have. We're going to present these three, and then we would just ask that you take it in, and when we're completed, we'd very much welcome and encourage any questions. And I know, by the way, too, I will shut up here because there's a lot of other things going on after this, so we're going to try to move things along. So I will turn it over to Alma Brown.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to talk to you about the importance of wayfinding for the city of Peoria. Is it on? Okay. Especially as diverse as our community is. We've got the downtown, central business district, riverfront district, and warehouse district. When I was reviewing information about wayfinding in other communities, I came across something that said, there's no destination without direction. I think that perfectly describes the benefit of wayfinding signage. Wayfinding ensures that pedestrians can easily move from one point to another and encourages them to explore more downtown Peoria while they're walking around the city. It includes guides, map kiosks, and helps visitors navigate their way to places such as restaurants, the museum, bus stops, and the riverfront. One of the things we thought was important was to seek the support of various community partners. I'll share a few comments from Chris Setti, the CEO of the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. Chris believes that proper wayfinding can help strengthen downtown's identity and solidify its place as a destination worth visiting. A solid wayfinding system is a hallmark of a strong downtown, and it'll only work to improve its quality. In 2018, the city of Peoria began developing a wayfinding plan for downtown. The result was a comprehensive plan that does a great job of outlining the needs of pedestrians, vehicles, and businesses in the area. Now, a few points about the plan. It hasn't been approved or adopted by the city council. It's different from the bicycle wayfinding plan. And lastly, there are funding challenges as well as changing traffic patterns. Now, I'd like to turn this over to Ray Lees, and so he can go into further depth about our actual recommendation.
Thanks, Alma. Yeah, to get into this, to the specifics and the bullet points that we have through the PowerPoint presentation tonight, one of the recommendations is to adopt the plan and to integrate it with the bicycle plan that already exists. And it's just it's been on the agenda, as Alma mentioned. We did the study a couple of years ago, and we think it's certainly something that the city council ought to look at adopting, and in the process incorporating the bicycle plan, which has also been developed. And we've got to try and look at this in a very practical sense and understanding some of the challenges that the city has. And so we would recommend that as we look at this issue, that we prioritize really the implementation, and that recognizes a number of things. One is not only the strategic plan for the city, but also just kind of the fiscal responsibility that we would have as a commission, understanding where the city is with their budget concerns. So prioritizing the items in the plan so it's in alignment with the strategic plan of the city. And then we also recognize that the city is in the process of looking at changing maybe the one-way streets to two ways, and through that prioritization process, we would hold back, and those areas and directional needs that are in certain areas that would be impacted by that, we would hold those back, recommend that you would hold those back and wait until those issues are resolved before that, before any plans are implemented. And then obviously, as it indicates, if they're building a positive resident and visitor experience, and I think we all can empathize with that, because we've been in situations where we don't know where we're going, and it's just frustrating, and, you know, you turn around and go home, or you go somewhere else, but it ends up being a very personal kind of experience, and whether it's positive or negative, that's a reflection on the community, and I think that we all recognize and value when we go to a community that has good signage, good wayfinding, that it's a more pleasant experience. And so we would like to encourage that and have that experience for folks visiting Peoria. Now, when you get to the funding options, as I indicated earlier, there's an interest and need to prioritize the implementation, and unfortunately the 336,000 that has been a budget line item for the city ends up being crossed out when push comes to shove, and you're trying to prioritize issues for the city and fund them. We recognize that this 300K is a lot of money, and there are ways that either through other funding sources or just to say prioritizing and phasing the implementation, that we could take a smaller bite out of the wayfinding pie and look at how we can create the most bang for the buck and do it in a way that is manageable for the city and yet gets us off the dime and gets something incorporated that is a benefit for the city. And as it indicates here, possible funding options, capital improvement plan, TIF funding, and talked with Don Welch as Alma had talked to Chris Setti. I talked to Don Welch about this, and I actually talked to him this morning, and he said he'd be willing, and I don't know that this is, where this stands in the conversation, but he said that there's a tourist reserve fund, and that he would be willing to provide some funding out of that fund to help the city kind of get to the first phase of this process. So that's all I wanted to kind of review with you. I did just as a kind of a side note, I was curious as to what some other communities have done with this and meeting some of the same challenges. And so the Corbin Design Group, who we had selected to do the design work for Peoria, had also worked with Danville and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So being the guy that I am, I picked up the phone and called a couple of people over there and talked to the gentleman in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They had exact same issue. They had a little different setup with their downtown, where they divided it into quadrants. And the gentleman I talked to is overseeing the healthcare quadrant, which had a taxing capability that they use then to get the wayfinding done in that area. And so then they've done an incremental plan. Same thing with Danville. They didn't have the money to do it all in one chunk, so they broke it down into pieces, and they went out and kind of prioritized the locations and what the information was and did it that way. And they're still, and both of them are in a multi-year process of getting it done. So I think that when we do start it with a smaller increment, that we should have an end time when we want it to be completed and not start it and finish it 10 years later when things change. So that's all I have to share with you on the wayfinding, and I'm gonna segue then into the Riverfront Master Planning. Take a sip, and just
Ray, just a second. We have a question, Councilwoman Moore.
I don't know if, am I on? So, thank you. So, thank you for submitting this to us in advance. I'm sorry, let me apologize now. I have bronchitis, so, there it is. On your diagram, you brought some diagrams, some samples of what
Yes.
it could look like. Is there any consideration, or the other cities that you've spoken to, was there any sponsorship on the wayfinding signs that would help offset some of the costs that you might need. So you might have, let's say, a realtor who would really like to get all these people's eyes on their business for a certain amount of money. They could co-sponsor a certain number of signs. Has that been a consideration for the commission at all?
So, no, the commission hasn't been reviewing. The commission hasn't been reviewing that idea. I think we've been more focused on let's get it approved and then let's be creative about how to get it funded. So I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think we'd be happy to work through the commission to understand if there are some great target businesses to talk to about that type of.
Because I see the total cost is about $370,000-ish. And just for the pedestrian scale, you mentioned that there was a smaller number.
150 to 200, depending on what engineering costs are, and this was just a rough costing a
Right.
year or two ago, Nick. Yeah, the rough costs. Right. So the entire cost is, as Nick said, closer to 600. The two types of pedestrian signs that they identified, I think I was looking at something like 150 to 200, including engineering costs, is probably a good number to cash.
And so how many total pedestrian signs are you thinking about?
Nick, do you know that number? I think there were 3 of the regular and 12 or 16 of the other kind. So 73 total signs, he says.
Okay, so even just using
get you
that,
that number.
I didn't need the exact number, but let's just say you have 73 total signs and a sponsorship, I don't know, it's $1,000. Well, that's $73,000 potentially. That reduces it from 200 or 150 or whatever it is down to another number. And then you've got another organization saying that they might, Don saying, well, indicating he could kick in a little bit of money. And then we've got some, little bit of TIF here and there. And so now you're talking about being covered at least for the pedestrian scale. And I'd like to see us start looking in that direction also.
I think that's a great idea.
I would just add that the Corbin Design Group, the consultant, and again, just for an overview, this commission did not commission the sign study. That was a separate advisory group that was formed, ad hoc group that had different downtown stakeholders, and there were public meetings and so forth. The main thing is let's get the dust blown off it. Let's have the council review it, get questions answered, adopt it, and then start getting into the. But that's a great point. But the consultant had said that pedestrian-scaled directories, for example, that showed specific businesses in the warehouse district and others, those are sometimes very good opportunities to have businesses or organizations like the Peoria Riverfront Association, perhaps, where their membership pays for some of that. And there was also, as you know, early talks about down the road of a special service area in the downtown area. As Commissioner Lees had mentioned in Cedar Rapids, that was the source of funding. There's a lot of different sources, and perhaps directional signage for parking. There may be some opportunities for transportation-related grants from the state. I think being creative and really looking at a lot of options to find out ways to pay for this. But we just think it needs to get started.
Well, I want to say I do support most of this is in the first district and the downtown warehouse area. I mean, the downtown is more than just the warehouse district. And I'd like to see us move forward as looking at alternative funding sources that would reduce the burden that when it does come to council, when the council says, yes, let's do that, the number that they're looking at is a lot smaller. But I just want to let the council know that I do support us moving on this wayfinding. I was thinking that we've been talking about wayfinding since I've been on council for 6 years. And it's time that, after 6 years, we tell people where they're going. And especially with the Civic Center having their success here recently, they're having a lot of success bringing in a lot of folks into the town. We've got our what's going on the riverfront. And when people are at the Marriott and now the other hotel that's about to open up very soon, it'd be nice for them to be able to get around town and know where they're going. So, thank you.
I'm going to go Councilman Kelly. What was stated at the beginning is they're going to try to get through the presentation, then we'll do Q&A. So after Councilman Kelly, we'll let him finish the presentation, then we'll do Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about signs. Are there any other things we're talking about than signs? No. This
Wayfinding is just
wayfinding
signs, yes.
thing. There's more than signs, right? That's it. Okay. Do you have an example of one of the signs?
Yeah, we do have graphics that.
Could you show it to us?
It's going to be part of the presentation, I believe.
Oh, is that going to be part of the presentation? I don't know that I got a copy of it. Okay. I see. Okay.
There are some wayfaring signs around town that should look reminiscent of that.
Okay.
As part of wanting to be fairly similar to what we see on.
Okay, and you're talking about adding business names and things like that?
Yep.
Okay. Is there any thought about having that available for me on my phone when I'm walking around downtown?
There are capabilities that with augmented reality and other apps and so forth. It's a good variety. They have found that in the industry, even with all of our mobile technology, that actually having very good static signs that are durable but can be traded out are actually even more effective. But there's a range of capabilities, and it's really in the study. So I think the important thing is to get that in the council's hands, the full study, so you'll see all of the graphics and the thinking behind it and the parts of downtown that the districts, et cetera. So it's a very thorough and comprehensive study that was done through funds through the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. So I think you'll really get a lot out of digging into that as council.
Is that part of what you're working on? Or is that something you're not working on?
We've been talking about, do we add a QR code? What could that link to? How can we get the support to have that link to something that's going to be useful and current? And I don't know the answers to that question, but I think we're right alongside with you of like, how do we make this and keep this as modern as possible, accessible as possible as these things are changing? One of the great things about the pedestrian signage is there is some interchangeability in some of the signs, which will lead you to being able to, when the new QR code type thing is out, you can put that on the new sign. And so we've been talking about what that might look like, and I haven't talked to them yet, but I'm hoping to speak with the PACVB about, is there some sort of link up you want there so that you're identifying local restaurants, or, you're 5 steps from Blue Dock.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let's continue with the Riverfront Master Planning, and I think, Ray, you were going to take us through that as well.
Yes, kind of moving on to the Riverfront Master Plan, and I think that a number of you probably know that the planning for the riverfront has been going on for literally decades in one form or another, and being advocated and led and pushed by different people that have kind of been engaged with that issue. And so one of the things that one of the things that has changed from year to year, from decade to decade, is just kind of what is the riverfront. Well, the latest, or to be master plan, and the latest was prompted, and just kind of an indication of why it's maybe taken so long, is the removal of the Riverfront Village platform. That made a significant change to the riverfront in a number of ways, and now, as all of you know, it's a green space. It's a lawn that needs to be mowed, and it can be flooded, and it can be closed off after the flood. And so there's been a focus on that particular area as far as what to do with that opportunity to develop or to leave alone. So that has prompted the riverfront planning charrette that happened earlier this year in April, brought together a number of people from throughout the community. It was open to all, and there was the community advisory group that was formed to kind of help with that effort. And that provided a little bit of a push to keep the activity going, because with the Director of Public Works leaving, and there have been people changes and a number of other changes along the riverfront, but the planning charrette was a positive experience. We got some good information to the planning group, and then the kind of looking at the end of this year, 2019, to complete it in its current state, its current boundaries, which again have been defined and redefined from bridge to bridge. It's now the southern bridge keeps moving in that whole planning process, and so taking in obviously recognizing the impact on the warehouse district and other areas that have changed over the last 20 years, and we have new needs and new opportunities. And so with that, I will turn it over to Vincent, who will get into a little bit more of the specifics as far as the recommendations. Vincent?
As you all know, the riverfront is the most unique and valuable asset we have in downtown. So we need to leverage it, not only to attract outside visitors, but also to engage and excite local residents. I believe we do a good job now, but it could be better, specifically as it relates to the riverfront plaza. Work is being done now to finalize plans, hopefully by the end of 2019. But the commission would recommend not only finalizing and endorsing such a plan, but moving forward with certain activities sooner rather than later. My understanding is that the timeline for the riverfront master plan would be November. There's no reason why we can't be using that space now. Overall, the plan can be done in phases that reflect current resources, because we all know that that's an issue, but we can begin experimenting with the space and increasing engagement at little to no cost. The planning process has shown that the public would rather see open, flexible space with changing uses during the year, rather than a fixed use that may only attract use for part of the year. We would recommend the potential for having pop-up events like yoga on the river. We currently do yoga in the park at Glen Oak Park, and I think it's a very successful event. We could do pop-up markets involving local vendors, temporary art installations, picnics with live music or other small-scale performing arts events. We could also expand the space allowed for food vendors. Right now, food carts and trucks can set up on private property without much trouble or cost, but when it comes to public spaces, they are restricted to small zones and have to pay a significant fee to operate. If the city had more relaxed policies here, we could have food truck frenzies on the riverfront plaza during certain nights of the week or during certain nights of the month. In terms of resources, like I said, there are a number of low to no cost events the plaza could be used for now to get people engaged and excited for what's to come, even before the official plan is adopted. In terms of resources, there's very minimal staffing resources that would be needed to oversee and implement these events. But overall, in terms of the council's responsibility, certain events such as food truck frenzies or other events that require certain permitting, we'd ask you to review the existing permitting policy regulations and maybe look at more flexible options so that we could have these types of events that would attract, again, not only visitors, but local residents to get engaged in downtown.
So next we're going to talk a little bit about our planning review team. Paige.
So our final recommendation for you is regarding the combined sewer overflow issue. Over the course of researching for this presentation, the Downtown Advisory Commission has reviewed dozens of existing plans and projects that have already been created for the city, and we found that almost none of them have any consideration for the combined sewer overflow issue. So given the number of issues that the CSO causes the city, we recommend that in the future, any projects or plans that are created for the city should have some sort of consideration. They should be required to have a consideration for the CSO, even if that's just a simple statement that says, this impacts the CSO negatively or positively, and is there an element that can be added to the project that could positively impact the CSO. There's could be, additional cost to projects if there's an element added for the CSO, but just to ask the question, there's no additional cost or much time required.
And I think to follow up on that, today we do consider the CSO in our plans. We don't have that explicit statement in every plan. And so that's that transparent conversation through the plan with the public, that we're thinking about this, we're being thoughtful, we're maximizing that opportunity every time. Because I've had the conversations with our planners. Of course I'm thinking about that, but it's not that bubbling up of just a paragraph of talking about what that interaction is. That's where the recommendation is leading.
Well, so to wrap up our presentation, want to thank you again for the time. Also, I wanted to state that everything we have talked about and presented to you this evening has been discussed in public meetings, and we've gotten direct input from the Downtown Development Corporation, the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council, Peoria Riverfront Association, PACVB, and other property owners and stakeholders. It wasn't just something that was sort of dreamed up. Not to mention, of course, it was vetted through the various departments and the city staff and so forth. Just on the screen, these are not necessarily in order of priority, but we mentioned this is the first of what we see to be other future presentations to you. And these are topics that right now have bubbled up that we think are important. It includes a real vision for downtown Peoria that would guide our decisions and your decisions. The value proposition and importance of downtown to the entire city and the entire region, why this is such a unique asset and important for our city's future, the downtown. Downtown branding and marketing efforts, downtown streetscape master planning, which is another study that was done talking about implementing that in steps and phases. A downtown boundary map as to where downtown physically is and how do we identify that. And also a topic that's timely is the proposed Murray Baker Bridge lighting. What we would ask you in the near future to think about other things that you feel you would like. We want to be as useful to you, the council, and the mayor as possible. And so if there are items that you haven't seen us mention tonight that you think are important, we would encourage and welcome you to get those suggestions through Assistant City Manager Rattler. And she, of course, is our regular liaison and has done a great job leading this effort. So we want to come back to you in the near future with the next layer, the next batch of recommendations. But we hope we've given you at least a broad overview. These are not meant to be real tactical. It would be up to the council then to dive into them and figure out with staff how to prioritize and implement them. But I think the main thing is these things need to be started. They need to be, it needs to be entered into the budget process. And it can't be the paralysis of analysis or frozen by dollars where this plan costs so many millions we can't even get started. You need to get started. We need to get started. Downtown is too important for our future and our present to not do that. So we would, if you have some time, we'd answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, we thank you for your time this evening.
Well, we have time. I think what we want to keep in mind is that the objective tonight was to bring this forward, get it on everybody's radar, get at least the conversation started. And we can't make motions and cast votes or anything else tonight anyway because we're in a policy session. We're going to be in a policy session. But if there's any questions that the council would ask tonight, I would say that the floor is open to do so. But we're probably really looking more forward to that opportunity to actually have solid proposals, thoughts on what we can do to help it's good timing with the budget's going to start in about a month, so it's good timing to get this subject up in our focus right now. I'll say it does kind of date me a little bit, but in 1999 I served on the Riverfront Business Development Commission that was chaired by Jim Baldwin at that time, and this is the exact same thing that we were discussing 19 years ago, and we still haven't done it. So I agree that it's appropriate, especially with the amount of development that's happening down there. Maybe just one thing, not really a question, but I just want to throw this back to you, Mr. Chairman, and the members. And again, thank you for what you're doing. This is a very important commission, but make sure that, did you say we're 6 years old now? About 6 or so years? Make sure that we have representation on, 6 years ago we tried to think about all the entities that should be represented here. And so if there's anything or any group that we neglected, make sure we bring them forward so we can make sure we keep that involvement going. But is there any questions or anything that we want to give to the group before they leave tonight? I have Councilman Sear and then Councilwoman Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple questions. This presentation I did not receive. I got an updated one. I don't know if my colleagues received that presentation or not. Could we resend this, or I don't know who would do that? I'd love to get this presentation, please.
Yes.
Second question would be, tell me about, and I don't know if you know, Mark, can you tell me about the bridge? When the work's going to start, when it's going to be done? I mean, there's going to be a window of opportunity to start these ideas during the construction of the bridge. Who knows exactly when that's going to take place?
I bet Nick Stouffer has a pretty good idea about that. Or maybe Bill Lewis.
There are several projects going on involved around the bridge. So right now there are a couple of projects going on both sides of the river as prep work for the Murray Baker Bridge. Once that is completed, then they'll start that. So that bridge doesn't really start construction until next year. So this year is just prep work on both sides of the river. They'll do all the construction next year for the I-74 bridge. Yeah, 1 year. It'd be opened in 2020. Yes.
Councilwoman Ali.
Thank you, Mayor Artis. And thank you all for the work important work that you're doing. I had a quick question for Mr. Lees as it relates to the potential funding. First, from the potential funding from the Tourism Reserve Fund, whether you got an estimated range of what might be donated.
I have that.
Well, again, it was a conversation I had with Don this morning because we had talked about this a couple of different times, and the number he shared with me was 50,000.
Oh, okay, that's good.
So I don't know exactly what numbers he has.
We haven't finished negotiating yet.
What that represents, some of the reserves that he has.
Okay, that sounds like a good number, though.
Yeah,
But
good number to me.
the other question relates to potential grants. Have you identified some potential funding sources that might contribute to such wayfinding? Okay, so that's some
we haven't
research
researched, yeah.
that still needs to be done then. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just have a few questions here. Do we have an idea on the number of pedestrians? I guess I'm not sure who to direct my question to, but the number of pedestrians, visitors that we have on an annual basis and bicycle riders in our downtown?
I don't know if we certainly don't have that available, but I would guess that tourism would be the PACVB, and their in terms of traffic counts and so forth, that might be Public Works to some extent. But I'm certain that we don't have that readily available to us.
Okay, I was just looking for some.
I can get you numbers in terms of the number of conferences we have annually, and the number of attendees can range up to 10,000 per conference event. And then, of course, we have the arena events and stage events as well. So I can get you a little bit of that sort of the Civic Center rotation that's going through. And then I think I can also get you some of the overall tourism figures. So it should be pretty gettable or estimable. So I can get you that.
Riverfront activities and the Riverfront Market, for example, there's numbers that could be assembled for those.
That's great, and that's the kind of data I think we need to help us make our decision here more quickly. Also, talking about the lighting and the lighting of the bridge, was there any discussion about just lighting downtown in specific areas or any type of ordinances that we could pass for that? Any research done on that?
I think that's, we haven't specifically gotten into that, but that is part of the downtown streetscape master planning proposal where street amenity items like furnishings and lighting is consistent, low energy, attractive, so we don't go block to block and have different colors of lights, different styles of lights, different maintenance schedules and things like that. That's all part of the aesthetics and overall appearance, but that's another reason why I think implementing that downtown streetscape master plan is very important.
And as far as the wayfinding signs, I think it's definitely needed in our downtown, and especially something that would work with a phone app, as Councilman just mentioned here. I think the majority, in fact, I had this conversation with my kids today about, I used to carry around maps in my car, and they were kind of laughing at that, and actually my middle son was saying, yeah, I had to print out MapQuest to help Mom find my friend's house, so he had to print that out, and then my youngest one said, what, you had to print out a map? So it's just kind of interesting how quick the technology is changing here, and I think we just got to keep that in mind here, that the electronics probably, if not more important, certainly just as important to our strategy. Thank you. Nice work on everything.
Councilman Moore?
I want to thank you also for your work on, it's getting better, for your work on this project. I will have to say, though, that the thought of the digital cell phone interaction with the sign has always been part of the discussion, but it's also part of the discussion is how to pay for it. So I'm glad to see that there's some council members that are willing to kick in a few more dollars for some digital cell phone electronic monitoring kind of thing. But thank you for what you've done. I appreciate your coming here, and I look forward to working with you even closer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments for Downtown Advisory? I'm not seeing any, but Councilwoman Jensen.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if this was, I apologize for being late, if this was already covered, but do we know how much funding might be? It says just TIF funding's estimated available in 2021. Do we know how much there is available?
So it depends on how we approach the issue. The TIF funding available in the Central Business District TIF, we thought was available, but unfortunately had double booked it for parking deck repair. And so once that is done, we should have plenty of funding coming in to cover a significant portion. The commission, I think, is hoping to not have to wait 2 years to get started. And so this is part of where the looking at other opportunities has been coming from. That said, TIFs are connected, and there is money in TIFs. So that's something we can continue to talk about, but we would definitely need council support if we were going to port money from another TIF, maybe that's less active, like the Eagleview TIF, into a downtown activity.
Okay, and then I have one more question for future things, and I don't know if you hit upon this too. I know at one point, not that far away, parking downtown and especially in the warehouse district has been a big issue for your organization as well as lots of citizens. So I'm expecting that will be on your list of priorities?
Yes.
Okay. I look forward to that because I get a lot of calls about that. So I think that that's important as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any more questions, so we have a motion to receive and file. Councilman Regenbach, seconded by Councilmember Kelly. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion passes unanimously. Mr. Chairman and members of the DAC, thank you very much for your time tonight. We look forward to a more thorough discussion soon. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We're at 19-174 is a request to receive and file a policy session or report on affordable housing.
Okay. Director Black.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this evening talking about affordable housing issues. In the binder before you, in the first tab, is the presentation that we will be seeing on the screen. And then the tabs following that provide some additional information related to the topic of affordable housing. I would like to think that this is probably part one of a multi-part discussion. There's a lot of information in here, and I anticipate that there will be follow-up questions and requests. So we will push through this as quickly as possible, understanding that I'm happy to provide follow-up information if requested.
Director Black, do you want to make it interactive as you go through questions as they come up? Do you want to make your presentation and then do it? What would be your preference here?
My preference would be to push through the presentation and then take questions at the end.
Okay, so council, just make notes and either page numbers or specifics, and then once we get through the presentation, we'll do that. Thank you.
And finally, if there are any questions, I'll certainly answer whatever I can this evening. We can follow up with reports, with a report back on questions that we can't get to this evening. Councilman Ruckriegel sent me some questions earlier today that I will try to work into this presentation too. And finally, I'd like to thank Catherine Murphy and her grant staff for really helping put together a lot of this information. Okay, well, it's changing on my screen, but not on the big screen. Okay. So 4 sections this evening, a summary of some affordable housing terms, just so that we're all speaking the same language, an overview of both the national and local affordable housing issues, a presentation on local and national housing strategies, and then some discussion and direction from council. So we're going to start with the question of what is affordable housing. So the most common definition of affordable is relative to gross income. And the HUD definition is that if someone is spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, then they would be considered housing cost burdened, and they are therefore not living in an affordable situation. So you can all do the math in your head in terms of your gross income divided by 12. If you're spending more than 30% of that a month on your housing costs, then you are not in an affordable situation. A further definition adds in transportation costs, that if you're spending more than 50% of your gross income on housing plus transportation, then you are not in an affordable situation. So this slide is the affordable versus affordable, because affordable housing can mean, on the left-hand side, what we just talked about, that it's relative to your gross income. So as you can see from the little picture, the little rich guy doesn't have enough money to pay for his giant house. He's not living in an affordable housing situation. On the right side is affordable housing that comes up most often when you're talking about some type of subsidized housing. So this is housing that is set aside for individual or a household based upon their income or some other qualifying criteria. So that could be they're elderly, they could be disabled, there could be some other qualifying criteria that allows them some type of subsidy to live in a less expensive environment. Here's some examples of subsidized housing. Place-based vouchers, tenant-based vouchers, sometimes called Section 8 vouchers or housing choice vouchers. Public housing itself, and in town here, there are a few public housing developments remaining. Low-income housing tax credits is a financing mechanism in order to develop housing. HUD Section 811 and Section 202 are long-term HUD programs where developers can receive funding specifically for persons with disabilities or for elderly. And then the very last item there is home-funded development. And home funds, of all of these items listed there, home funds are the only funds that the city actually has available for the development of housing. So in terms of the actual numbers, income ranges, so everything is based upon a percentage of the area median income for a household. So the current area median income, the 2019 area median income for the Peoria metropolitan area is $76,900. So what that number means is that the imaginary household of 4 people, the median income is $76,900. So income limits are set as a percentage of that. The most you can make is that 80% limit. That's considered low income. If you're at 80% or below, you're considered low income. So an individual in the Peoria metro area making $43,050 a year would be considered low income for the purposes of subsidized housing. A household of 4 making $61,500 would be considered low income. And then you step down to the very low income, which is 50%, and then the extremely low income, which is at 30%. So one of the things I want to point out here is that when it comes to how we address income and affordability and low income, the terminology workforce housing gets used a lot, because when you get certainly into the low income category and even into the very low income category, you're really talking about workforce housing. This is an individual making $43,000 a year, which is probably not a bad starting salary for someone who's relatively young. And a 4-person household making $61,500 a year, again, for the Peoria area, that's pretty good. So let's do, I know we're getting heavy in math, and I realize that it's after 7 o'clock, but some affordability calculations. So let's just run through this and see what it means in the real world. So if an individual who is extremely low income, their annual income is $16,150. That's the most they can make and still be considered extremely low income, which means their gross monthly income is about $1,300 a month. 30% of that is $450. So if that person is spending more than $450 a month on their housing costs, then they are living in an unaffordable or a housing cost burdened situation. If they're spending more than $673 on their housing plus their transportation, then they're also in a cost burden situation. And then you can just step down through the rest of that table all the way to a family of four, a low-income family of four, making right at the borderline of low income, $61,500. They're obviously in a more comfortable situation in terms of how much they could afford before they would be considered cost burdened. The other calculation that goes into a lot of discussions in terms of terminology is fair market rents. So fair market rents are set by HUD, and they are used for a series of different programs. Most of the HUD-funded programs, some of the state-funded programs will tie the funding for a particular project to fair market rents. So basically, if developer A wants to build apartments and wants to use some HUD dollars or some state of Illinois dollars to build those apartments, then in exchange, they can't charge more than fair market rent for the apartments. So you can see kind of what that fair market rent limit is. In many ways, the fair market rent for an area will effectively set the floor for rental. And you won't find a whole lot of rental units renting for less than the fair market rent amount. So, continuing on with some language here in terms of a housing continuum. This will change, and the words will change a little bit, but a lot of communities look at this continuum of housing from unsheltered homeless all the way through market homeowner. And as you move through that continuum, your income levels will generally increase, and the level of public subsidy will decrease. Obviously, what this doesn't count in terms of level of public subsidy is the pretty substantial public subsidy that's provided through tax benefit for mortgage interest and property tax for market homeowners at the very bottom of that list. So everything in blue, and you can kind of see the blue text versus the black text, are housing situations that are typically subsidized. There's some type of public or private subsidy to help the person living in that situation afford to live in that situation. Once you move to a market rental, you're paying your own way, you typically don't have a subsidy, and once you're into market homeowner, the same situation. So this, I think, final slide in this section, the location, spatial mismatch. So one of the challenges when we talk about affordability and housing affordability is where is the house relative to all of the other things that the person needs to get to, whether that's work, school, retail, anything else. So, the top left, you could have someone living in a relatively dense urban area where they're paying more for their housing, but they're paying less for transportation because everything that they need may be very close to where they are. The opposite, on the top right, someone living in a more suburban situation, they may pay less for their housing, but they're going to pay more for the transportation because they have to travel long distances to get to the locations they need to get to. So this is just a reminder that we can't really just talk about the cost of the housing. We have to talk about everything and remember everything else involved in housing. So moving on to the why and the who of affordable housing. Why does affordable housing matter, and who lives in affordable housing? So I'm not going to read these to you. They're in here. This is a quote from the Illinois Association of Realtors, strongly supporting the development of affordable housing. Similar quote from the National Association of Home Builders. And then finally, some information on fair housing laws that are related to housing discrimination and the importance beyond it being the right thing to do, it's also the required thing to do in many situations. This quote from the Center for Housing Policy, again, I won't read it, but it it kind of gets to the core of it's really difficult to have a successful city if housing is not provided for all of the people who need to work at the jobs that are in the city. If you have that mismatch, that spatial mismatch between there are jobs available, but the people who would be attracted to those jobs can't find housing near the jobs, then that is simply not a situation that is efficient. So just a summary, why affordable housing matters to a community. It's been shown over and over again that when you have decent affordable housing, stable housing, it increases school performance, it decreases homelessness, it increases behavioral health, and increases jobs. So on this slide, what we're seeing here is a survey that's put together on an annual basis. It's called Paycheck to Paycheck. You can go on the internet and look it up, and you can search all sorts of different communities all over the country. So what it does is they've taken data that shows what the typical cost of a one-bedroom, and this is for rental, a one-bedroom rental, a two-bedroom rental, and a three-bedroom rental would be in Peoria, Illinois. And then you plug in some typical jobs, and this database says, here's what the typical auto mechanic, dental assistant, nursing aide makes in the city of Peoria. So according to the National Housing Coalition that puts this together, they're saying that in order to afford a three-bedroom rental in Peoria, you need to make about $39,000 a year in order to not be cost burdened. Okay, we're back to that cost burden. And then, according to their calculations, if you are a public school teacher or an auto mechanic, you're fine, you're making more than that $39,700. If you're a dental assistant or a medical billing clerk, then you're pretty close. You're within a few dollars of being in a good situation. So again, this comes back to the thought that when we talk about affordable housing, in many ways what we're talking about is workforce housing for people that have jobs that are making between $24,000, $25,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year. So, how is affordable housing developed? The primary way that affordable housing is developed and probably constitutes 80+% of all affordable housing development in the last 20 plus years is through low-income housing tax credits, around 90%, through low-income housing tax credits. It's a federal program that is administered through the states. The Illinois Housing Development Authority, IDA, is the state agency that provides low-income housing tax credits. It's incredibly competitive. Very, very difficult to get tax credits because they're worth a lot of money in terms of doing development. The second half of that sentence, that no substantial public housing has been constructed since 1983, and this goes back to kind of a terminology. Public housing is housing that is owned and operated by a public housing authority. So for Peoria, Taft Homes, Harrison Homes, Sterling Towers, those are public housing developments. And effectively, with some tax changes and some changes in federal regulations in the early 80s, the development of public housing stopped. So any public housing that you see is old at this point and getting older every single year. So developers apply for low-income housing tax credits through IDA. As I said, it's a very competitive process. And effectively what happens is it's not a direct financial contribution. It's a credit that someone will buy and then provide dollars back to the development. So for example, the tax credit that everyone chases after is called the 9% credit. And so if you had $1 million development and you received a 9% credit, then you would get $90,000 worth of credit per year for 10 years. So you would have $900,000 worth of credit on your $1 million development. Now, you don't get $900,000 because you have to sell the credit, and the credit doesn't sell dollar for dollar. So depending upon where you are, someone may give you 80 cents on the dollar, you may get 85 cents on the dollar, you may get 70 cents on the dollar. But in terms of equity into the development, you're still talking $750,000, $800,000. So it's a significant investment of dollars into a development. Home Investment Partnership Program. Home funds are funds that come directly to entitlement communities like the city of Peoria. They have to be used for either the creation or the preservation of affordable housing. We have been using our home dollars for many years in partnership with some CHODOs in town, community housing development organizations, Habitat, PCCEO. We've put home funds into various East Bluff projects for affordable housing. We have some home funds committed to the redevelopment of Pearson Hills that will be coming up later this year. The issue with home dollars is that the allocation that the city receives has been dwindling for many years now. Right now, we're about $500,000 a year in terms of our total allocation. So, which seems like a lot of money, but when you're talking about housing development and developments that are multi-million dollars, tens of millions of dollars of development, $500,000 is not a significant amount of money. So some other programs that create affordable housing, there are funds from the Federal Home Loan Bank. There's obviously private donations. Habitat, again, in town works a great deal with private donations. Rebuilding Together, which used to be called Christmas in April and does a lot of rehab work. They work mostly on private donations. And then there are other tax credit, federal and state incentive programs that exist. Naturally occurring affordable housing, so or usually just called NOAA because, I don't know, someone came up with it. The majority of affordable housing will always be called naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's just basically housing that is filtering down. So a new house is built, somebody buys the new house, they sell their old house. That old house will eventually, that value will drop. And it's the same for single family houses and for multifamily houses or multifamily apartments. So as the value drops, obviously the house or the apartment complex becomes more affordable. So that's a naturally occurring affordable housing situation. The challenge with naturally occurring affordable housing is as the housing gets older, it can also deteriorate. And what we end up with is a situation where instead of having decent affordable housing, we have old crappy housing. And those two things are not the same. So where of affordable housing? Where is affordable housing found and where can it be developed? Both HUD and IDA, based upon direction from HUD, have been moving in the direction of the deconcentration of poverty. And this was based upon a series of court cases and policy direction from various federal administrations. The goal of the deconcentration is to not continue to have low-income developments in areas that are already low income. That's part one. Part two is to provide the opportunity for people to live close to, or at least in proximity to the services that they may need, whether those services are jobs or retail, whether grocery stores or transportation or anything else. So what IDA did, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, they created what they call opportunity areas. And the opportunity areas, there's the locational goals for IDA's opportunity areas. So when IDA is making decisions in terms of providing low-income housing tax credits or other funding mechanisms. They want to see that the area where the housing is planned has access to employment, has access to health care, amenities, transportation, everything else listed there. So they want more than just a affordable, decent place for someone to live. If it's 10 miles from town and there's no transportation back and forth to town, that's really defeating the purpose of what the housing is supposed to do. So IDA creates a map of opportunity areas. So this is the most recent IDA opportunity area map. Everything in a blue shade is an opportunity area. Everything not in a blue shade is not. It is very, very difficult to get housing, to get IDA assistance, competitive IDA assistance, to develop housing in any of the areas that are not shaded in blue. So that's sort of the picture going forward. The picture right now, this is a map that shows the percentage of subsidized housing in the Peoria area. And as you can see, the highest concentration of subsidized housing is sort of on the west side of Peoria, just south of Interstate 74, on the East Bluff, and then in certain sections of the south side. You will notice that there's subsidized housing pretty broadly spread through the metro area. On the other side of the river, you can just kind of see the top of Pekin at the bottom of the map there. So subsidized housing is not something that is only found in Peoria, but certainly there's a concentration in certain neighborhoods in Peoria. Location of housing choice vouchers. Housing choice vouchers, sometimes referred to as Section 8 vouchers. These are the vouchers that are portable, that a household qualifies for the voucher, and then they can use it at any rental situation where the landlord accepts housing choice vouchers. So again, you can see the concentration on the bluff down into the south side, but certainly housing choice voucher usage on both sides of the river and in large areas of town. Here's a summary of the area housing authorities. There are more than one housing authority in the Peoria area. So the Peoria Housing Authority is obviously the largest one, and this data is a little old. We're waiting on some updated data right now, but I don't think these numbers will have changed much. So the Peoria Housing Authority has 936 units under management, so that's actual units that are owned and managed by the Housing Authority. And then they have 1,900 vouchers authorized, so they can distribute 1,900 vouchers to residents, to households, to then go and find a private rental situation that will accept those vouchers. The East Peoria Housing Authority has no physical public housing, and as I understand it, they never have. They simply issue vouchers, and they have 195 vouchers that they make available, and the vouchers again are portable, so the person with that voucher can take them anywhere that will accept them. The Pekin Housing Authority is the exact opposite. Pekin has, I think, one brick and mortar housing, public housing development, but they don't manage any vouchers. And then the Woodford County Housing Authority has both, obviously again smaller than the Peoria Housing Authority, but a few units, 64 units under management and 240 vouchers. So here's just a quick image of the 5 communities in the Peoria metro area that have the highest percentage usage of housing choice vouchers or Section 8 vouchers. So again, Peoria, certainly the highest raw number, numeric number of vouchers, but Washburn, Spring Bay, Eureka, and Roanoke all have a higher percentage of housing units that are using housing choice vouchers than Peoria does. Washburn is actually more than twice the percentage usage of housing choice vouchers that Peoria has. Location of public housing, so this is the traditional public housing, and again, for Peoria, this would be Taft, Harrison, and Sterling Towers, and then a few scattered site public housing units that are owned and managed by the Peoria Housing Authority. So the financing dilemma that Peoria faces in many ways that other communities also face with the policy of not concentrating low-income housing in low-income areas, or the deconcentration of affordable housing. The challenge is that the best place to build new housing may in fact be in the area where with the greatest concentration of affordable housing right now, for multiple reasons. Maybe that's where people want to live, number one. Maybe that's where the least expensive land is, and if you can get inexpensive land, you can make the whole development cost less. Maybe that's where the best public transportation is. Maybe that's closest to the jobs. There's all sorts of reasons why at a granular local level, there may be reasons not to take a housing development and say, we're going to put it way out here because there's a map that says that's where it should go. So IDA, realizing very, very quickly that this was going to be an issue throughout the state of Illinois, created what they called community revitalization strategies. And so a community revitalization strategy is a plan that can be developed that IDA will work with local communities on. And it's a typical neighborhood plan, but it has a housing component to it. And part of that housing component is developed in such a way that it looks at the existing housing, it looks at the demand, and it determines, is there a demand and is there a good location in this area for further infill housing. An adopted community revitalization strategy will get as many points on an IDA application as locating in an opportunity area. So, back to highly competitive funding process, you get more points if you're in an opportunity area. What IDA did is say, let's try to balance the playing field a little bit. Let's say that we're going to let the local communities make some decisions in terms of where the best location for housing is, based upon all sorts of factors. And the way to do that is to have an adopted community revitalization strategy. So at this point, working with IDA, we have 3 community revitalization strategies that are underway. There's one on the near north side, one on the south of Village, and one on the East Bluff. I do want to emphasize that these are not simply housing plans. This is not a document that says, here's where a house will be built, or here's where 5 houses will be built. These are neighborhood plans that are developed with neighborhood input. But simply having them in place and working with IDA opens up the opportunity for more development in more areas of Peoria. It effectively makes us far more competitive. Okay, so quickly, kind of a national snapshot. So there's more than one challenge when you hear about affordable housing. There's the hot market challenge, there's the overburdened household challenge, and there's the condition of the housing stock challenge. And they're all interrelated and overlapping. So the hot market challenge, it's very much an isolated issue. And the example here that I give is Mountain View, if you work for Google. So the average rent in Mountain View, $4,150 a month. Median household, median home value jumped in 10 years from $750,000, which I think was expensive to start with, to $1.8 million. The image on the right of all the RVs is now quite a typical image on the streets in Mountain View, because people who are working for a lot of the companies in Mountain View simply can't afford to live anywhere. And so what they do is they buy an RV and they park the RV on the street, and that becomes their house. San Francisco, which is having a similar situation, the newest thing there is that people are buying little boats for several $1,000s, and they're taking the boats out into San Francisco Harbor, and so that's now where they're living. They're living on their little boats because they can't afford to live on land. That's a hot market issue. That's a Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, Austin's getting there, New York City. That's not Peoria's issue. So let's go back to this slide here for a second. This was the who can afford to live in Peoria, or who can afford to rent somewhere in Peoria. Same data as before, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. And again, just for reference, in order to afford a 3-bedroom rental in Peoria, you need to make $39,600. Here's the same jobs in San Francisco. In order to afford a 3-bedroom rental in San Francisco, you need to make $163,000 a year. So even though, according to them, according to this data, a auto mechanic in San Francisco makes $61,000 a year, which is better than the $46,000 that the auto mechanic in Peoria makes. But in terms of being able to afford housing, they're obviously in a far worse situation because housing is far more expensive than in Peoria. So that's the hot market issue. The overburdened household issue, this is the widespread issue. This is the issue that doesn't necessarily make the headlines in the paper, but it's where we came in on this discussion this evening, that there are an increasing number of households that are spending more than 30% of their income on their typical housing expenses on a monthly basis. The third issue is the condition of the housing stock. So this again is a widespread issue, but it certainly has geographic concentration. And it gets to the question of, just because living somewhere is inexpensive doesn't check all of the boxes if where you're living is a place with a failing foundation, or windows that are falling in, or a hole in the roof, or all of the other housing deterioration issues that exist. We don't have any slides this evening on housing conditions. It's a big part of affordable housing, but with the amount of time this evening, I think it was just too much, so that would probably be part 2 of this discussion, hopefully sometime in the near future. So again, on a national level, there's a National League of Cities task force that was put together that someone we know is on, that is putting together a study that will look at what communities, both states and local communities, are doing throughout the country to publish this information so that communities can learn from each other in terms of best practices for affordable housing issues. So that's the national issue. Local snapshot. Home ownership in Peoria. Peoria continues to be a very, very affordable housing market for homeowners. A recent study that came out that said Peoria is the 5th most affordable metro area for homeowners, with the calculation that this particular survey used was a multiplier that basically said the median home price in Peoria is just a little more than 2 times the median household income. So we get a score of 2.1, that makes us very affordable. And again, it's that relationship between income and the cost of the housing. The cost of buying housing is low here, and incomes are relatively stable. The least affordable U.S. metro out in California, in Santa Cruz, has a multiplier of 11.6. So in that case, the average person has to spend 11 times their median income to buy a house. And then just for fun, the least affordable anywhere is Hong Kong with 18. So one of the reasons that Peoria is affordable, you can see on this map with median sale prices. So these are in different ranges. The sort of the lightest shade there, the median sale price for these houses was less than $50,000. The next shade up, we're at 50 to 100, and kind of move through in $50,000 elements to the most expensive area is 200,000 and up. So there's a lot of relatively inexpensive houses available in Peoria for the sale market. And there's no hard number on this, but generally speaking, we would say that if your household income is $35,000 to $40,000 or up, you could be in the market to be a homeowner. Doesn't mean that you have to be a homeowner, and there's a lot of people making the decision not to do that now. But if you're below that $35,000, then you're just probably not in the market to be a homeowner. So here's a map that shows the areas of the city where there is a homeowner cost burden. And again, you can see that the majority of Peoria has a very low percentage of households that are cost burdened. The areas of the city that do have a higher percentage of properties that are households that are cost burdened are in the valley, a little bit on the East Bluff, and then on the far kind of northwest corner of the city out by Grand Prairie. That's the highest in terms of cost burden. Very different picture for rental cost burden. So same data. These are now rental occupied units with households that are cost burdened. And you can see compared with the homeowner cost burden, it's far wider spread and much more concentrated. And the percentages are significantly higher. The deepest shade of blue there are households where 56% or more of the households are cost burdened. So 1 in every 2 rental households in these areas that are the darkest blue are spending more than 30% of their income on housing expenses. And again, you can see, because this is a map that shows a little bit of the metro area, that the issue of housing cost burden for rental doesn't just exist on this side of the river. There's also issues on the other side of the river into East Peoria, up through, I guess that would be Metamora and Spring Bay. This next slide shows you the percentage of houses, housing cost burden by zip code. If you look in your binder, you actually have an updated slide on this with some additional zip codes. So don't look at the screen. If you have a binder, don't look at the screen. So basically what this shows is the percentage of homeowners and the percentage of renters by zip code that are spending more than 30% of their income. We're on slide, it's slide 49 in the booklet. And again, I think what this drives home is that the challenge of affordability in Peoria really is in the rental side of the market and not so much in the owner-occupied side of the market. Because although there are situations where, in the 03 zip code, 25% of homeowners are burdened, 05, 22%, that's far less than what we're seeing in the rental market, where it can be as high as 45, 47, 54%. Just another data sheet here showing the median existing value of houses in Peoria. Everything in blue, the typical median value of an owner-occupied house in the area that's blue is more than $125,000. In the area that has no shading, it's less than 125,000. Now, why 125,000? The reason I put this slide in here is to sort of foreshadow a discussion of what makes it so difficult to build affordable housing. If you think about a single-family house, it is really, really difficult to build a single-family house for less than $125,000. So even if it's a 1,000 square foot house, that's $125 a square foot. Just straight market, no subsidy, no one's giving you any grants, no one's giving you the land for free, just $125,000. So the challenge becomes from a lending standpoint and from an appraisal standpoint that if the houses around you where you want to build that house are not selling for what you're going to pay to build your house, it's unlikely that anyone is going to lend you the money to build that house in the first place because it won't appraise out at the end of the day. So the choice then is go and find some subsidy that will reduce your costs so that you can build the house for $125,000, but you only have to sell it for $90,000 to make the numbers work. Or we work at increasing the value of all of the houses around it. So, another data slide: vacant housing units. So, the vacancy rate for the city overall is about 4.6%. Everything that has a shade of red has a vacancy rate greater than 4.6%. The highest rate of vacancy currently in the city of Peoria is on the near north side, where 25% of the structures are vacant. And this has nothing to do with vacant lots. This is simply structures. So 25%, one in every 4 structures is vacant. Some of the other areas, the lower East Bluff and a couple of areas on the south side, were somewhere around 20% vacancy. So the vacancy rate is very, very high, which again makes it difficult to build new housing when there's existing housing out there that's sitting vacant. So why is there all this vacant housing? I don't think this would come as a surprise to any of you. This is a population trend for Peoria, generally south of Forest Hill. And this is the total population. So in 1930, 1940, there were about 110,000 people living in Peoria, which is pretty much what the population is today. The difference is that in 1930 and 1940, they all lived south of Forest Hill. And now, Peoria has obviously grown geographically. So the population, the most current population numbers we have for that same geographic area is somewhere around 42,000. So a lot of population has moved out, and people move much easier than houses. So that's one of the reasons that there are so many vacant structures remaining. Final chart here, and I think I'll leave you alone for a little bit in terms of charts and numbers. This shows the median sale price and the monthly rent for houses in Peoria by census tract, from the least expensive to the most expensive. So let's look at the blue line first. The blue line is the sale price of houses. And you can see the least expensive parts of town, houses are selling for, they start around $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 to purchase a house. And then that goes all the way up to a median of about $225,000 in the most expensive part of town. That's not an atypical trend that you would see in any city, where you're going to have a range of houses from less expensive to more expensive. The low end is very low in Peoria. There's no question about it. There's not a lot of communities that where houses are selling for $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. What's a little unique about this is the same trend does not exist in the rental market. So if you look at the green line, what you're looking at is the average monthly rent for rental units for the same areas where the houses are selling. So instead of seeing sort of that typical linear trend where it goes from less expensive rental to more expensive rental, what we're really seeing is that the rent ask jumps around between $600 to $800, and then in the more expensive parts of town may jump up to $1,200, $1,400, $1,600. So the question of, well, why is that happening? Why don't the rents drop relative to or in association with the sale price? The literature on this points to two things. One is the fair market rents that are set, that I said sort of sets the floor, that's as low as rents will go. The other thing is just simply actions by investor owners of properties, that once you ask for less than $500 a month for rent, it may not be worth renting the place at all. If your rent that you're asking is $200 a month, is it really worth it? Or does it make more sense just to effectively close the house up or abandon the house or sell the house to someone else? There's some price point pressure that below it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so all of this kind of goes to the question of Peoria with a weak real estate market and the development challenges in a weak real estate market. We have a supply and demand that's out of sync in a lot of neighborhoods. We have a high demand, or we have a high supply of housing units, but we don't have a demand for the housing units. The surplus of housing units creates a down pressure on the prices, which makes new construction really, really difficult. So the choice is you either reduce the supply or you increase the demand, or you do a little bit of both. As we talked about in terms of that cutoff point for 125,000, will a property appraise out? If you went in on speculation, built a house, would it appraise out? And that's a question that developers have to ask themselves every time they do a development. And then obviously, will there be a demand at the necessary price point? Will someone actually buy the house for what you need to sell it for? I'm not going to go through these. These are just a couple of pro formas, so please take a look at them. But basically what this does is it shows the typical $125,000 house that would need about a $43,000 subsidy in order to be built. And then the second slide shows that for a low-income household to afford that house, they would need about a $11,000 subsidy to make the numbers work. Okay. Past actions, future opportunities. What are we currently doing? What is the city of Peoria currently doing? What have we been doing now for some time? We provide direct funding. And the direct funding that we provide is typically in our home dollars. We've provided some TIF dollars in the past for affordable housing development. That's an eligible use of TIF dollars. We provide CDBG funds, but CDBG funds cannot be used for the construction of new housing. They can only be used for the renovation of existing housing, so that's kind of it's a different market. The city provides letters of support. Generally, when someone comes in for a tax credit application or they're going to submit a tax credit application to the state, then they will need a letter of support from the local community. So that helps. That gets them some extra points. We have traditionally, for as long as I can remember, waived permit fees on the development of affordable housing. And just last year, the city council took some actions, maybe 2 years ago, the city council took some actions to relax multifamily zoning, to basically make multifamily zoning easier to develop so that if someone wanted to come in and do apartments above a commercial development, then they would be able to do that, which obviously can make more of a mixed-use type development occur. What are other communities doing? I don't expect you to read any of this, but there's some good hyperlinks in here. So Housing Trust Fund, Columbus, Ohio, and a lot of other communities have done something similar where they basically create a local fund. And that local fund could be provided through some type of dedicated funding source. It could be permit fees, it could be transfer of fees, it could be something that is set aside that goes into an affordable housing trust fund that can only be tapped into for the development of affordable housing. So that's what some other communities are doing. Second case study is inclusionary zoning. There are communities that have they've implemented inclusionary zoning. Basically, what inclusionary zoning is it's a requirement that if a development has more than, typically if it's more than 5 or more than 10 units as part of the development, then a percentage of those units have to be set aside for affordable housing. It seems to work in hot markets where there are significant profit margins. What it seems to do in markets that are not so hot is it basically kills all development because it's a cost that goes on top of the existing costs for development. Case study 3 is infill, missing middle housing, and we've got some examples from Chicago and from Peoria here. So infill housing, missing middle housing is basically saying what can be done from a regulatory standpoint to allow people to build on lots or in areas of town that would typically under the current zoning regulations not allow them to build. Because an awful lot of Peoria that was built prior to 1931 when Peoria first adopted zoning regulations couldn't be built today. You know, the units are either they're too narrow, the lots are too narrow, they're too small, or the density doesn't work. If you look at a lot of neighborhoods that were built pre-1931, what you'll find is that there's a mix of single family and duplex and maybe a quadplex in there, maybe an apartment building here and there, but it's kind of a mix of what you would see in a neighborhood, which is virtually impossible to do now. It's, you know, single family is over here, duplexes are over there, multifamily is way over there. And what the missing middle approach does is it basically says what can be done from a regulatory standpoint to allow for additional types of housing between the single family house and the large apartments to be built. There's some examples from Chicago. Last year there was a competition that was held, the Congress for New Urbanism, CNU, held a competition. It was a nationwide competition to develop and design infill housing, and they were looking for some good examples of areas that infill housing would work in. And the presentation submission that actually won the grand prize, the national prize, was right here in Peoria, up on West Main Street, the top of the hill, the old Steak and Shake site, for those of you who remember the old Steak and Shake site. And it's the top picture of the slides there. Very, very nicely designed, and that's the type of missing middle development that would be designed to fit into more of an urban area where single-family houses probably wouldn't fit. Case study 4. This is a residential tax abatement program in Akron, Ohio, which has been very, very successful. Basically, Akron will abate 100% of property taxes for 15 years, and they have seen a significant increase in the number of housing units that they've developed that have been developed in Akron since they implemented this particular program. And I think it's one of these situations, and I do intend to drill down a little bit more on this, but I think it's one of these situations where that difference was enough to tip the scale to make the numbers for development work. You know, whether that difference was $10,000 or $20,000 over 15 years or $30,000 over 15 years, whatever it was enough that when the developers put their pro formas together, all of a sudden everything penciled out as before it didn't. Case study number 5 is the combination of municipal services and housing. The slide at the very top is a brand new firehouse. I know that we've got the assistant fire chief back there. It's a brand new firehouse in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a really nice looking building. And what happened in that situation is that the plan went from building just a firehouse, a standalone firehouse, to building a firehouse that actually has affordable housing units above it. And it also has some commercial in there. There's a little grocery store. So it became a multi-use development that was where the cornerstone was the firehouse. And then the final case study, again, combining services, municipal services with housing, is in Chicago, where the Chicago Housing Authority and the Chicago Public Library has a partnership. They've actually finished 2 of these 3 developments where it's affordable elderly housing that is being built above brand new public libraries. So libraries on the ground floor, the affordable elderly housing is right above it. So in terms of some upcoming local actions, as I mentioned at I think the very last council meeting, we have the HUD Consolidated Plan, which is our 5-year plan for the use of the federal funds that come to the city of Peoria. That is due next year. It'll start in 2020. So we're going to be working on the development of the Consolidated Plan starting this month. That'll be a very public, outreach intensive process, and that's really the document for the purpose of HUD that would need to contain direction and goals in terms of affordable housing development. As part of the Consolidated Plan, we will have an affordable housing plan. So that will look specifically at the topic of affordable housing, at the need for affordable housing in Peoria, and then putting together some strategies in terms of how to make that happen. And then the third bullet point there is I would very much like to have a future policy session on the condition of the housing stock in Peoria, because obviously that's a large component of the naturally occurring affordable housing. So final slide. This is sort of the question or the questions that are out there. So what is the root of the challenge for affordable housing? Is it that housing is too expensive? And if that's the case, how do we reduce the cost of housing? Is it that housing is not available? If that's the case, then how do we cause the creation of more housing? Is it that housing is in bad shape? And if that's the case, how do we make sure that housing is in better shape? Or is it that the household income is too low? And if that's the case, how do we work to increase household income so that it's easier for households to afford better housing? I would suggest that one of the things that makes affordable housing so challenging is it's all of these and probably a few more that are not up there. And so it's not something where there's just one solution. It has to be a menu of solutions that can be approached. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Black. So we have probably a lot of questions over the information that was just given to us. We also need to set a little portion here because Councilman Kelly would like to introduce an item under the topic probably of revitalization strategies, I think. So would the council like to ask specific questions on the presentation, and then we'll listen to Councilman Kelly's revitalization strategy, and then can ask him questions on that. Does that make sense? So we'll just open the floor to questions, comments, discussion, direction on the presentation. I think Who did I see over here? Councilman Euler first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Black, I'm really intrigued by the case studies that you presented on the screen, especially in light of our discussions this last year on building a new fire station. Could you quickly take us through those and talk about which ones that you perceive to be the highest potential for us and what the barriers might be to some of these? And then you mentioned the West Main Street project, and what was the outcome of that? And is there anything that could potentially go somewhere there, and what was it for, and all that?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. So going back to the first case study, the Housing Trust Fund, effectively, it's, as I said, it's a dedicated funding source that goes into a segregated account that can only be used for the development of affordable housing. And I think in the Columbus example, I thought I had it in here, but it's, you know, typically it could be real estate transfer stamps, it could be some portion of permit fees. It really, it's going to vary from community to community, but it's a decision that the council, with the local authority, has to make in terms of we're going to take this money out of our general revenue stream and put it into something else. So it's a relatively simple step in that it's completely under local control in terms of how much to put into this housing trust fund. You know, so for example, the building permit revenue for the city of Peoria last year was a little more than $1 million. So if the city council had made a decision that all building permit revenue goes into an affordable housing trust fund, then we'd have about $1 million a year that we could make available for affordable housing development. The other side of that is, well, that's $1 million a year that's not going into the general fund, that is going to have to be cut from somewhere else. So it's a relatively simple move, but it has the consequence of taking money from somewhere else unless the council wants to create an entirely new funding stream specifically for this purpose. Inclusionary zoning, I'm happy to talk about this more. I don't think this makes any sense at all for Peoria. We're just not in the type of market situation that would react well to an inclusionary zoning requirement. We're not building enough units, and the cost involved in effectively buying down 10%, which is typically what you would be looking at, of the units to make them affordable, might be enough to just cause developers to say, no thanks, I'm going to go build in one of the other communities around Peoria, because, you know, inclusionary zoning, all the city council could do is make it a requirement within the corporate boundaries of the city of Peoria. And so it wouldn't stop someone from saying, instead of building here, I'm going to build across the river or just outside of the city boundaries. The case study 3, the infill missing middle development. We've had, you know, as I said, the council has relaxed a lot of the development requirements to make development easier, particularly on the commercial side. You know, the decision that the city council made a few years ago to eliminate parking minimums is a huge step to encourage commercial development, because now these older, smaller commercial areas can develop without scratching their head and trying to figure out where they can get their parking. On the residential side, there have been changes that the council has approved that have relaxed some of the standards for residential development. The missing middle, and I'm happy to bring this back again in more detail in terms of what other steps the council could take to make it easier, but one of the kind of the entry level points on this is to allow duplex development as a by right development in single family districts. So right now, you can't build a duplex in a single family district in Peoria without, it's complicated. You can't do it by right. So a duplex is actually a really good way to not only develop affordable housing, but also create an income stream for somebody. Because if you think about this duplex, there are 2 units. The person who builds the duplex moves into one of the units, rents out the other unit. And so now they've got income coming in, which might be enough to cover most of the mortgage costs on the development of the duplex, but they're also providing housing for a second household. So that's what a lot of communities that have looked at missing middle have done. That's sort of been their entry point, where they've said, okay, we will allow duplexes in single-family districts. And maybe it's only in some single-family districts. Maybe it's only in some areas of the city where there's an overlay that is approved by the city council. But that's kind of the entry point. Some of the other missing middle approaches are, they're called bungalow courts, where you would take a block and you would have a series of relatively small bungalows that maybe surround a central green area. So again, what you're really doing is you're increasing the density of development beyond what would typically be allowed if it was just a series of single-family houses being built there. So that's missing middle. The Peoria project, fantastic project, and I can send out information to all of you on the details of how this worked. But effectively, it was an architectural design competition. So the winner received, I think, a very small financial reward and a plaque or something saying that they were the winner of this particular competition. It wasn't really designed in such a way to be something that would necessarily be built, but more of a vision of what could be built if a community was looking at something that was kind of a missing middle urban type development. Now, if somebody came along and proposed something that looks like the winning entry for the Steak and Shake site up on Main Street, then I would certainly be on the phone to Councilman Graham and having a discussion with him about seeing if this was something that would work on the West Bluff. But I think a development like that would work in various locations in Peoria. I don't think it would necessarily have to be on West Main Street. It's more about a density of population and a density of units. So I believe in terms of making regulatory changes, this is one of the things that as a community we could continue to explore. Residential tax abatement, and I don't want to steal Councilman Kelly's thunder because I think this is part of what he was going to speak to. It's intriguing, if nothing else. It really comes down to the question of, is it enough to tip that balance? You know, if there's a gap of $30,000 that needs to be filled in order for someone to build a house, then creating a $5,000 abatement isn't going to do any good. But if the gap is $4,000, well, you know, now you're in business, and now we may actually have something that would work. So I think that the residential tax abatement is well worth further exploration. And then finally, the combining municipal services and housing, you know, whether it's the Alexandria version or the Chicago version, or simply just adding housing to development that is not traditionally housing. And that could be as simple as putting apartments above a strip mall. You know, you've got some that, I mean, that's the way a lot of commercial districts used to be, where the people that worked in the stores or owned the stores lived above the stores. And a lot of communities are now going back to that, where you will have apartments, and then on the ground floor you'll have some type of of retail development. So I think that mixing of uses, and what makes these case studies somewhat unique is that it's the municipal component that really kind of leads the way and that pays for the foundation, if you will, for the entire development. So I think that's certainly worth looking at, and it may just simply be it may simply only be asking the question when a development comes along, is there a way that we could incorporate housing into this particular development?
Okay. Dr. Ali? Dr. Ali, I'm not sure your mic's on.
Sorry.
Thank you.
The presentation is rich in education and data and research, and I know it took a while to pull it all together, so I appreciate it. A couple quick questions. Is South Village the entire south side, or where is South Village?
South Village is the near south side, so from Western to MacArthur, from King down to Jefferson, Adams.
Okay. It goes as far south as Western? Is that where it stops? MacArthur to Western. Okay. 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 Got it. And then based on, I guess, census data, can you quantify, or whatever research you've done, can you quantify how many households in Peoria City fall within that 30%, 50%, or 80% threshold?
Yes, I don't have that data right in front of me, but I can certainly get that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On March 10th, 2018, we had an affordable housing policy session.
Yeah,
This is the binder here. And I don't know how many, I think there was only 2 folks around the horseshoe now that weren't here at that time. But I don't know if anyone has taken the time to look through it. And I've requested that for Councilwoman Ali and Councilman Kelly, if the director can recreate this for you guys, because it's an excellent document. Mm-hmm. Much of what you saw today is in there. March 10th, 2018. And that's what I bring up today, is that much of what's in here today was in the March 10th, 2018. And at that time, the director asked the council to address 3 questions. I've just closed the book. And those were questions to try to help him to get at some type of direction from the council. And while I'm flipping back to that page, Director Black, can you tell me if you ever received any direction for those questions? I can tell you what those general policy questions were. Where should affordable housing be located in Peoria? What level of support for affordable housing does the city want to provide? How does the city want to provide support? Did you get answers to those questions? It's okay to say no. We already know what the answer is.
Well, so I was going to say yes and no, because that's the type of answer that Don has taught me to give. The answer is yes, because the council has been very good at making decisions on affordable housing development questions when they come before you. No question about it. I think that the challenge is, and I kind of wrote down in my notes here, that the challenge is that without an affordable housing strategy, kind of this overarching strategy that says this is so that anyone who is coming to Peoria or is in Peoria and wants to do affordable housing, they can look at this document and they know what the council would support and not support before they have to ask the question. That's the no part of the question, but certainly what the council has done is been very receptive and open to requests that have come forward for affordable housing development on a project-by-project basis. And yes, very receptive to the conversation that we had shortly after the policy session in March of 2018 to make some changes to make multifamily and duplex development easier in Peoria. So I'll stick with yes and no.
Okay, well, that's a very nice answer. That's the type of answer in corporate America we were trained to give. So I won't put you on the spot, because if I was going to put you on the spot, I would ask you for the answers to where should affordable housing be located. If I was going to put you on the spot, I would ask you what level of support for affordable housing does the city want to provide? And if I were going to put you on the spot, I'd ask you, how does the city want to provide that support? But I'm not going to put you on the spot to answer those questions. Rather, I'd like to suggest, because I've gone through your presentation that you provided to us in advance, I thought this was going to be it, and then I saw the book, and it's a lot more there, so I appreciate that too. If you take the time to look at what Director has provided, you will find that this booklet that I provided after I came back from Washington, D.C., that information is in there. And also, The Missing Middle, this was a book that they provided for me to review. It's very good about talking about housing that can be implemented in areas that are of greatest need. And we're talking about the South Side and the North Valley, some parts of the East Bluff, and then some parts of Pearson Hills area. So my next question is about the CDBG funds you indicated could not be used for new housing. What can it be used for again? Let me refresh our memory on that.
CDBG funds can be used for the renovation of existing housing.
Okay, renovation of existing houses. Are there any qualifications or limitations on how much that renovation can cost?
Yes, it's not necessarily a dollar amount. It's a reasonable cost based upon the local market.
Based upon what, I'm sorry?
The local market.
Okay, and so that's the rub right there. So when we're talking about 61605 and parts of 61603, the local market doesn't look very good, and it's not going to get there unless we do something drastic. For example, there are a lot of homes that we've taken down because quite literally they were falling down, and I get that. But there are quite a few homes, and we even went through a couple, Joe Doolin and I went through a couple that we thought we could save, and it came back that the houses, to save them, because someone had poured concrete down all the drains in one house, and the other house had black mold in it, and all the piping and wiring and utilities had been ripped out, that those houses were going to cost a minimum of $75,000 to put back into just life safety, not even making it pretty. And so what I'd like for us to get to, and I don't want to be long because we've been here for a while already, is for the council to consider a couple of things as we look at the policy session in the future. Because literally last time, there wasn't a lot of conversation that took place after this presentation on March 10th of 2018. And where we are today, I really don't feel like we've gotten that much further. We've not had a whole lot of conversation about this, and although the presentation that you have today is quite extensive and very good, it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for what I was hoping we would have, would be actual discussion about where we need to move, how we need to move forward. And so I would like for, especially as you're developing the new consolidated plan for the next 5 years, starting with 2020. So we're into that discussion now. I'm glad we're going to go out to the community and hear them tell us what they've been telling us over and over and over again. We just don't seem to get it sometimes. I'd like for us to focus those CDBG dollars as renovation on those homes that the community can identify in the North Valley and South Side that we can renovate. I've always said we cannot demo our way to prosperity, and that seems to be what we're doing, because by the time we get to some of these houses, they're in such bad shape that it would cost $100,000 just to bring it back to life safety and we can't, and that's hard to swallow when you were talking about, excuse me, houses and areas that you're going to look for the area medium income or what's happening in the community to determine if CDBG can go there, but it's a non-starter because we already know the areas are so depressed, we have to do something different and trying to determine if this can be used. Now I know am I correct in that there's prevailing wage in Davis-Bacon that's part of the CDBG use of those funds?
This is another yes and no. It depends on the number of units in the project. So if it's below, I believe with CDBG, if it's below 12 units in a project, then Davis-Bacon does not apply. So if
That's the same as prevailing wage?
Yeah, same
Okay.
as prevailing
Okay.
wage.
So 12 units or less, I can work with that. Okay. The other thing is, I'd like for us to be, the council to direct staff to be intentional in the creation of that 5-year consolidated plan and the community revitalization plan so that these areas of most need are first and foremost on the list. So we're talking about, once again, North Valley, we're talking about the South Side, we're talking about parts of the East Bluff, and you already talked about the Pearson Hills that's getting that attention this year. And so I don't know if that's maybe the main area in that district that has some concern, but I think we need to be more intentional with our direction to staff that this is where we need to start working first. One of the things that came out of a meeting with IDA yesterday is that the city provides a letter of support for those individuals who want to go to IDA and receive either 9% or 4% tax credits. And to the degree, Corporation Counsel, that it is legal, I would like to suggest that we develop some tiered or levels or whatever whereby everybody doesn't get a letter. Everybody, it'd be great if, because one of the questions I asked in the meeting yesterday to the director was that, are those letters just going to the first or second or third district? And his answer was, no, we've sent letters of support to projects all over the city, which is interesting because there are areas that have been significantly under disinvestment for decades and decades. Yet we don't have an intentional plan to address those areas because, as we have heard, CDBG can be limiting. And even some of the home funds in the last few years, and that's one of the questions that the director is providing some responses to that I sent him on Sunday. Where have those home funds been going by zip code? Because you can say it's been going to, let's say a lot of it's been going to the first district. Well, you may assume that it's going to the South Side, and I would say you're assuming incorrectly. So we need to know where those are going in the first district, and that's part of the information that's coming back. Yeah, that's letters of support. And so those are the three things that I would like for the council to be intentional about. The letters of support that we provide, if they have to go through, what I learned yesterday also was that if PHA doesn't support some of those requests that are going into IDA because some of those projects require project-based vouchers, or is it project-based vouchers? And so we need to be intentional about who gets those letters and determine what areas we're trying to revitalize, and if it's not in those areas, then we don't provide a letter, because that says that, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And right now, the South Side has not been a priority, and it needs to be. So finally, I would like to find out. So we're going to have a part 2 to this affordable housing meeting. I would like for that to be more conversational, that folks have taken the time to look at this material that director has labored so hard to provide us, and maybe go back and find the general policy questions from before, because truly, if someone asked me what level of support for affordable home housing does the city want to provide, I would be hard pressed to answer that question, because as you said, it would be a yes and no. What area are you talking about? It's not like we have a lot of money in our budget to apportion out for affordable housing. So we have to use somebody else's money, and that's the federal government. And if we're not focusing in on areas of disinvestment, then we're not serious. I mean, we're finally trying to get serious now with some things that are going on the south side. We replaced the bridge, and we're going to do $12 million on Western, but okay, what about housing? We're not serious yet. Lastly, I just want to mention one of the things that you're going to receive from Director. I asked him to provide a 5-year overview, 2013 to 2018, of the funding. This is federal funding by council district, by zip code, and by funding type. And I've asked him to further divide that funding by zip code to learn what organization specifically has the money been going to. Because in 61605, over the last 5 years, this report indicated that there's been $3,848,745.31 into the 61605. And I'm still looking around like, really? So that's why I want to know specifically where that money went, and if it was for housing, because this report is called the City Assisted Housing Programming. I'm looking for that money. So, in 61603, this report indicated that $5,650,327.30 went into 61603.
Do we have that?
No,
It's under the fifth number, the last tab, I believe that was inserted.
In the last tab?
Under number 7. Everybody's got that.
It's in the last tab, tab 7? Okay.
Oh, I see it.
So thank you for providing that, because I did it on Sunday. I had them like 8 questions, and so it's in tab 7. So we need to determine if we're being intentional for those areas that everybody, I think, around this horseshoe would agree that have suffered under disinvestment. And if we say, yes, you're right, it has, we're not talking about city money, so let's hear this clearly. We're not talking about city money for the most part. There is some money, because if there's infrastructure, sidewalks and things like that, we're going to have to do some things like that. But for the most part, we're talking about federal money. That if we're not directing those federal monies to leverage some of the things we're doing on MacArthur Highway and some of the things that we're going to do on Western, then we're not serious. And I would like, as we're coming into the budget cycle, to start looking at this affordable housing in a more serious issue, because I don't know when the second policy session is going to come up. Because pretty soon here we're going to get into the budget hearings, and we're going to be all over town talking to people. We're going to have additional meetings, us getting together, and just like March 10th, 2018, March 10th, 2019 came and went, and finally, at the last meeting that I was here, I asked, let's put a date on the agenda for the affordable housing. And so, Director, I would hope that when we come back for part 2, that it is less slides. I think we've got enough information based upon what you did last year and what you did this year. You've done a lot of work. Now it's up to us to help you. If we're not providing you with direction, then shame on us. And I don't plan to get through this budget session without calling this out every single time. And so we're going to get hung up on this every single time during the policy session, I promise you. If we can't come to some decision, I'm not going to try to tell you what decision you should come to. I just would like for a decision to be made, a direction to be provided, and so the community sees that we are actually serious and that we've heard them. The 15 times we've asked them what they wanted. We're going to do another survey because IDA requires that. And so we're going to go out to the community and they're going to say to us, well, haven't you asked me this 15 times? And we're going to say, well, yeah, but IDA won't let us do anything without asking you again. And so I would like to be able to say to them when they ask me that another time, that this time we're going to do something, that the council is committed to it. So I hope each of you would think about this as we move forward and be committed to moving on this so that June 18th, 2020 comes, or later. I'm not saying here's from 18, here's from 19, and now 2020, we've not done anything, because I'm not going to be the one sitting around here saying that. Rather, I will be asking some more serious questions as to why we didn't get it done. I think we can get this done. It's not that we got some smart people sitting around this table. We can get this done. It's not brain surgery. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Regenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Black, you're the person. How's that? Thank you for the wealth of information here. And I think for me, it was really important that we began with some definitions, because I think when you talk about affordable housing, there's so many misperceptions in the community that it's important that everybody, that we start at the same level playing field in what exactly we're talking about. And I would just say I really appreciate the passion with which Councilwoman Moore spoke, particularly about question number 1 that we were asked a year ago. Where do we support affordable housing in Peoria? And that's clearly not something we're going to solve tonight, but that's something that we need to address, because we find ways to slip out of making that decision over and over again. And until we address that, it doesn't matter how much we're willing to support affordable housing. It doesn't matter where the resources are coming from. If we don't know where it's going, it's just a futile mission. I would just be remiss if I didn't remind all of my colleagues here that right now Peoria Opportunities Foundation has an incredible affordable housing undertaking that's actually in the East Bluff. And it's going to be 25 single-family units as well as 4 duplexes. And we're going to have, we've shown our support in providing lots for these, and some of the other mechanisms, permits and whatnot that the director outlined as things that we oftentimes do. And I'm particularly excited about this because of the magnitude of the project and the increase of the housing stock that it's going to give us, and the hope that it's going to spur those other landlords who all of a sudden have 25 brand new units. They're going to have to do something to their substandard properties. But again, this begs the question, where do we support it? And we all, like Councilwoman Moore said, well, that'll be a discussion for this body, and I would just encourage us to think long and hard about that, because that's going to be the first step in order to actually get the ball rolling on this issue. So, thank you.
We're going to go to Councilwoman Jensen, and then after that, I'm going to ask Councilman Kelly if he would like to present his thoughts on the revitalization strategy. Councilwoman Jensen.
Thank you. Oh, is it on? I left it on. Thank you, Director Black, for all your work on this again. I appreciate it. This has been a big issue for me for a number of years. I think in fact, I pushed to have the first policy session, but just to give you, I have a few questions, things that we talked about at the last session that may be in our material and you didn't touch upon it, but we talked about numbers, and at that point, I think it was reported to us that Peoria needed 4,000 to 5,000 units to equalize things, and at that point, we had fewer than 2,000 affordable housing units. Is that still the same?
Yes, the data that was presented in March of 2018, that hasn't been updated, and so it's a little old at this point.
Okay.
I don't know, I wouldn't call it stale, but and it's also, it's obviously a moving number in terms of what is the deficit of affordable units? Because the deficit of affordable units is going to be based upon the income of households in Peoria and what is being charged for rent. So that number is obviously changing all the time. But generally speaking, going back over the last decade, there's always been an estimated gap of somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000 units that would provide decent affordable housing for households that are making less than 80% of area median income. But the real pressure point in Peoria, which I think hopefully the data showed this evening, is probably in that extremely low income category. It's not really the 80% and below or the 50% and below. It's really the households that are in that 30% and below of median income that are feeling a significant housing crunch.
Just as a follow-up, can you give us an update just to see what those numbers were from 2018? The other thing I think was brought up during that policy session was what is the number of homeless people in Peoria? Can you also provide that in the report back? And just to give you some idea, I appreciate you coming back with specifics from cities. And I understand your concerns about inclusionary zoning, but I would like us to explore that further. Maybe there's a way to do it so we require less numbers or a lower percentage, or we only offer certain incentives, economic development incentives, if they provide a certain number or a certain percentage of that. So it's not required for all, but if you were to do it, then you get more incentives from the city. Or as an alternative, then you donate into a fund, if we were to establish a fund that would go to affordable housing. I think I don't want to just write it off because I think it's a tool that could work, and I understand your concern about us losing development to surrounding areas, but I think especially with now the development going faster or going better in the warehouse district, it is something that I've even talked to developers with that are currently developing in the city, and I think some of them are open to it. So I don't want to just write that off. I think that's something that we should definitely consider as a council and as a city. And I'm also very much in favor of looking into removing the barriers, like allowing fourplexes in single-family areas, like it's worked in Minneapolis. I think that is something that we should definitely explore further. And I'm interested to learn more and explore more on that tax abatement idea. With regards to both Councilwoman Moore and Councilman Riggenbach's point about we need to figure out where this is all going, I think that we need a comprehensive plan, and I think this is the first step to do that. So we have not just a strategy, but a plan that we all give input, and then the public gives input, and the people that need the housing, that are going to use the services and are using the services, that they're stakeholders in this, and they're part of developing that strategy and that long-term comprehensive plan. I think that's all I have, but thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Black. As Councilmember Moore and others have said, that was a very good, very comprehensive report. You gave me a lot to do, but it's okay. I'd like to talk about tax abatement as a tool as an effective tool in affordable housing that we are not using. Not many cities are using tax abatement. Basically, the way tax abatement works is if you are in a tax abatement zone and you you do something newly taxable in that zone, that newly taxable item is not taxed for 10 years. Where this has been tried, including in Peoria, I would like to say that it's universally very successful. I can't say that because I can't say that I've researched it to the nth degree, but I have not run across an instance anywhere where it wasn't a wonderful program. It also costs City Hall and our taxpayers nothing at all. Unlike many of the programs that we, not to denigrate these programs, but many of the programs that we have either pull taxpayer money from some other government entity, or we have to match it, or we do things on our own. This is a very, very effective strategy that takes zero money from our taxpayers. The other side of it is that if it is a complete and utter failure, we are not out any money. But I rather doubt, based on history, that it would be a failure. In the preparation that Director Black made, did I call him Director Ross before? But okay, all right, that Director Black made, there was info on page 64 on Akron, Ohio. Prior to their tax abatement program in 2015, there were 10 houses built in the city of Akron, Ohio, a city of about 200,000. That's down from around 300,000 at its height. After tax abatement in 2018, there were 1,000 new units built or under construction. In our own enterprise zone, versus the 4 years previous, once we brought tax abatement into the enterprise zone, which also had a 10-year tax abatement period, monthly building permits in that area were up 42%. The dollar value of those monthly building permits was up 1,008%. Tenfold. City spent no money to make that happen. Okay, it was 122 in 3 years. It was $122 million worth of new construction. I dare say the most successful redevelopment program the city of Peoria has ever had, by far. Now, we can do this. I found a statute a few years ago where we can do this in residential areas, in depressed residential areas in Peoria. And it's interesting what happens when you apply tax abatement to an older neighborhood. The near north side, the near south side, certainly the East Bluff, much of the valley and older parts of the bluff areas were mixed neighborhoods as they developed. There were wealthy people living, not quite cheek to jowl, but wealthy people, middle class people, lower income people living in the same neighborhood, going to the same schools, shopping at the same grocery stores. We got smart. We invented zoning. We decided, you know, everybody should be the same and all that stuff. I don't know if there's much hope for mixed neighborhoods in the newer neighborhoods we have. But in the older neighborhoods we have, I think with tax abatement, we will once again have mixed neighborhoods, which means all of a sudden our affordable housing problem starts going away rather naturally. And it goes away in a way that the people of Peoria want it to go away, not the way I want it to go away because I'm smarter than all those people. They figure it out, they do it. They make the investments, they recreate their neighborhoods. I've put together a proposal which some of you have read, which talks about the North Valley. One of the reasons I like the North Valley as the first place to give this a shot is that, first of all, it's very easily defined. Okay, there's the Bluff, there's I-74, there's the commercial industrial area along the river, and there's Abington, and it's this island. Secondly, it's big enough that we can probably prove our case, and it doesn't border on any other neighborhood that's going to affect it one way or the other. Thirdly, OSF is going to be bringing 1,200 new employees into downtown. And there are going to be, I don't know how many supportive jobs also brought into downtown along those lines, some hundreds more. If we do tax abatement in the near north side or in the North Valley, a lot of those people, instead of going out here or out there or somewhere else or some other suburb or whatever, they can walk, maybe. They can walk over to a beautiful new townhouse that has been erected. Living in a mixed neighborhood, they've got, if it's after some time, there's some commercial in there, there's a grocery store in there, there's a hardware store, and a dry cleaner, just like there used to be. We can extend our enterprise zone with an umbilical cord back to those old commercial neighborhoods that used to, commercial areas that used to exist, and offer tax abatement to them as well. No one loses with tax abatement. There's always the thought, oh my gosh, the school district is paying for our TIFs, and the school districts are paying for, you know, all this other stuff. The only thing that's abated in tax abatement is that new investment, okay? The land is not abated. So if we pass an ordinance to say, all right, this area on the map gets tax abatement, one of the first things that I think will happen is that the land value in that whole area will bubble up just a little bit. The land value in the North Valley is less than $1 a foot. It's unbelievable. It's so cheap. Okay? I think initially that land value will bubble up, and then as things begin to happen in that area, the land value will increase more and more and more. All that land value is taxable. So from day one, the school district is getting more money from that area for the first time in decades. The Park District, the Airport Authority, the Junior College District, and the city of Peoria, and the county of Peoria, within tax abatement, all these taxing bodies are gaining more revenue. And to the extent this is successful, the land value will continue to increase. The statute says that we can give tax abatement for 10 years. In the latter part of those 10 years, it trails off a little bit. There are some other things I don't want to take all the time. If you would look at this proposal, you can see that there are there's an income tax feature to this. And what's not on here is that umbilical that I spoke of to the commercial areas. But I believe that you all have this about how New York implemented such a thing citywide and how it was unbelievably successful, far more successful than any of its advocates ever thought it would be. You can refer to what Director Black has given us on page 64 on Akron, Ohio. There aren't many examples, and I'd be happy to send anyone the record on our enterprise zone tax abatement before it was given the kibosh, because that also was very successful. I don't want to take everyone's time, and and I guess what I'd like tonight, if it's the proper thing to do, is to ask the city manager, the acting city manager, to bring back a report or a proposed ordinance, or I don't exactly know where we go at this point.
Yeah. So I think, Councilman Kelly, and thank you for the information. I think what we're going to ask for here is for a follow-up on this meeting. And I'm just going to put it out there right now and say I think we would like to have that follow-up in 60 days or less. So let's put a finite outside on this. It doesn't matter if it's sooner, but I'm sure staff's been taking notes. I know I have on a lot of the questions that we would like to see further refined. And so what I would say, Councilman Kelly, if it's okay with you, if we include your concept within the discussion when we come back on the next policy session. It might be premature to say write an ordinance on it because I'm just because we're not probably quite there yet. But I think clearly between this which you've been a proponent of for probably as long as we've known each other, and also the stuff in Akron and the other communities that are using something similar. So if that's okay with you, I think we have the concept, we have the information that you've given us that will be included when we come back for this follow-up. Is that okay?
That's just fine.
Okay, thank you. I had Councilman Sear next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Black, congratulations. This is a great presentation tonight. It helps me a lot. Obviously, we all have a lot more questions. Just a couple questions on the report. Number one, I think Councilman Ali asked already, and maybe another one, another council person. I think for me, it's very important to quantify our problem. I'd like to know exactly how many units we're talking about, how many people we're talking about, and I think it'd be very important if you can come back with some type of report. That would help me personally a lot. Second thing, have you ever heard of any cities in the state in America that were self-funding for a project like this?
No.
Okay. Is that a possibility? I mean, and nobody ever talked about that. Do you know what I mean by self-funded? If we would be the bank. For let's say we quantify, we have, I don't know, we need 2,000 homes. Let's be the bank. Let's issue some bonds, and the bonds would be at, I don't know, 3-4%. Whoever needs the money would have to pay the same. I mean, this wouldn't be a profit for us, but we can charge the same rate as we would be charged for our bonds, so to speak.
I think it could potentially be done, and the challenge would be, and let me take back my hesitant no that from earlier. Some very large cities have some very large housing development projects that they self-fund, whether that's New York City, Los Angeles. The challenge with housing, and all of you know this, is that if you think about the housing market, it's a massive, massive thing. You have the entire private sector, the mortgage companies, the banks, the private mortgage people, the construction people, billions and billions and billions of dollars that go into housing. You have the federal government, which is the majority funder of affordable housing development, and also the regulator of most housing development, and the regulator of the people that lend money for housing development. Then you have the state governments that are also very large funders of housing development and also have a regulatory role in terms of housing and how it's developed and what it looks like. So by the time you get down to the local government level, we have very little influence. We're sort of the end of the tail. But it doesn't mean that with the right focus and the right emphasis that there can't be changes made at a local level by a local government. But I don't know that trying to self-finance a substantial development of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 units is something that would be manageable.
I'm still not 100% clear. What is the relationship between HUD and PHA?
So, great question. So the Peoria Housing Authority is not a federal agency. It is not part of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, same with every other housing authority in the country. The funding for the Peoria Housing Authority is primarily comes from HUD. So, and what housing authorities do is they carry out housing initiatives that are based upon federal regulations that are promulgated through HUD. So that's where the relationship is.
Okay, thank you. Just one last comment on I'm excited to see how excited Councilman Kelly is about this tax abatement. We've sure been talking about that for a long time. Unfortunately, though, there's other side to the coin. I've read this report here last month. The University of North Carolina conducted not a survey, what's the word I'm looking for? Study, thank you very much, research. And I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but basically, just to plant a seed with all of us tonight. Okay, it talks about, the study was about how states and cities have been hurt by all kinds of tax incentives. Okay, and when you say, let's give it a shot, I'm all for it. When you say there's no cost, there's a cost though. And I can give you a specific example. Here, this research here talks about how the worst taxes, according to them, okay, they did a 25-year study from 1990 to 2015 in 32 states, and looking at over 90% of all the transactions, from TIF to tax abatement and everything. And basically what it says here, the top 3 worst case scenario, according to this report here, was really research and development tax credit. Had the largest negative effect, then followed by investment tax credit, and the last one was property tax abatement. And the reason, when you read this report, is Councilman Moore, a few weeks ago when she was here at the last meeting, we're talking about the warehouse district where it's going well. Things are happening in warehouse district. But she made a comment that made me think about this report. Says, okay, now things are going well in the first district. Now we need some parking. So there is a cost, okay? There's always a cost. And we might not see the cost right now, but I hope we get 1,000 per minute. I think we can get going, but there will be a cost in the future because when the revenue stays stagnant, or maybe it might be going down because tax abatement or TIF or whatever, eventually services will definitely go up for sure. In different services, whether it's parking or other things. So there will be a cost eventually. And I hope we're very successful. I mean, I'm all for let's try something different. But there will be a cost down the road. I just want to make sure, I just want to plant the seed with everybody. According to this report, there will be a cost down the road for services. If it works, then we have to provide new services and more services in areas that are growing. It's that simple. So I hope this makes sense from this report. This is not from Councilman Seer, this is this report that I read.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Seer, I believe that my guess would be 95% of the tax abatement studies that have been done and tax abatement instances that have been done by cities and states have been what I would call rifle shot tax abatement. You really want this new employer to come into town. And so you offer that employer tax abatement and nobody else. Okay? And 10 years later, when the tax abatement runs out, so does that employer. Most tax abatements, and tax abatement gets a bad name because of this, most tax abatements are like that. They are rifle shot. They're not general. Most of them are commercial. Very few are residential. I wish I had a study to produce, but and I've seen those studies. When they say tax abatement, generally they're talking about all tax abatements, but most tax abatements are that rifle shot type, not the general type.
Okay. We're not going to debate the types right now.
No.
Councilman
I
Graham.
just forgot to make last point on the reports, if I could. Mr.
Councilman
Mayor.
Graham, we'll come back.
Okay.
Councilman Graham.
This has been a pretty interesting evening, but the problem I have with it is not a severe problem, but it is a problem in the sense that everything we're talking about is just so theoretical. And I close my eyes and I'm listening to Councilman Kelly, and I don't know if it's Lori Lightfoot talking or if it's Jack Kemp, one of my heroes of years ago when he was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Are we primarily interested in Peoria in using market approaches, incentive approaches, spurred on by the government? Do we want the invisible hand of Adam Smith to be the driver primarily without any government incentives? What do we really want to do? And a lot's going to depend upon what the specific proposal is. I do know that in parts of our city we have some great developments occurring, and they've occurred organically and naturally through time. For example, and I think it was alluded to in our discussion, we have fantastic development in the western part of District 2, about $25 million or so, Director Black, literally renovating each of the apartments in what used to be called, soon will be Parkwood Commons, used to be called Pearson Hills. I believe it's an inspired development. I believe Wallach Enterprises, and I'm not doing a commercial for them, they know what they're doing. They actually know what they're doing in terms of providing good housing. Why? Because I've seen them all over our city, what they've done in my district and in other districts. They're willing to work with the city to make certain it's a great new development. They're willing to consult with the neighborhoods and get input from the neighborhoods. Great project. It's going to be fantastic for our city. And it was needed because the project that was there had roughly about a 40% vacancy rate. So show me the proposal specifically and where we can do it. And I'm going to be as impatient as Denise Moore, and sometimes we need to be impatient. And I'm going to be as determined, well, maybe not quite, as John Kelly. And I'm going to be raring to go. Now, I had one of the best times ever. It's too bad that more of you couldn't have gone. I know Mike Mushinsky went and Director Black went. We saw a lot of private investment in the heart of the city, just west of Agatouches. in a development that's being renamed now because of all the money they're putting into many of these duplexes. Used to be called Fillmore Estates, Ravine Apartments, but it's being renamed. Stewart's Glen, and I guess the Ravine name stays, the Ravine Estates. Fabulous work being done. And you can't tell me that we don't have a lot of really good things happening right now in the city of Peoria. And I don't know if you folks are Republican or Democrat, how you're viewing this. I don't even know that it's relevant particularly. But we do need good housing. And I don't like the term decent housing. Like, are we talking about indecent housing? Of course we all want decent housing. And we want to be sure that whoever is being given even 1 cent of taxpayer dollars is running that particular development in a positive way for its people. And if it's not, it shouldn't be in business. And if it's not a credit to Peoria and our great people, then we don't need it and we don't want it. So, you know, when we hear, for example, all these discussions about what are we going to do, should we do it this way, should we do it that way, using this approach, that approach, and I like your approach, by the way. It's just going to depend on a specific proposal. And then Councilman Regenbach says, where are we going to do it? Where are we going to put this affordable housing? It's like all of a sudden it's a problem. It's like, where are we going to put these people? That's not what we mean to say. But I think a lot's going to depend upon who is proposing to do it, whether they have a good track record for doing it, whether they're willing to really be concerned about the people they're providing housing for, or is it all about money and money only? So these are some of the things that are going to make a big difference to me as we go down the road, because I've sat 9 different city councils and I've heard a lot of discussion and I've heard a lot of theoretical talk, but we don't really know what we're going to do, whether we're going to approve something unless we have a specific project. And I don't think this council wants to rule out a market approach. I don't think it wants to rule out government incentives either, or government, if government could do things a little bit better. But it's just going to depend on the proposal. So I hope we'll take this out of the theoretical realm, as Councilor Moore has suggested, make it more meaningful and relevant, and then we can have a more intelligent discussion, because so far I see that we're at 40,000 feet. You know, I want to get right down to where I can see what we're doing, and that's why I alluded to a couple of developments in District 2. I can see that, I can feel it, I can go out and walk it. And I know this is good. So, you know, I think there's a fear of what we're attempting to do here because we don't have more specifics. So I think that's handicapping us. But we are establishing a framework. Director Black's done a great job in concert with Denise Moore and all the rest of us who have had input. And we have a structure now within which we can operate and proceed. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councilman Moore, then Councilman Sear, and then Councilman Montalano.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Director, could you provide, when you bring back information, that something that compares and contrasts TIF tax abatement with TIF? And because you talked about, there was a mention that there would be no funding that the other taxing bodies would lose. So if you could provide something that shows the difference between the two. Because when I hear tax abated completely, that over what's done new, isn't that correct? Okay, so that sounds the same as TIF, but with TIF, the funds are coming in, but they're going to a fund versus being abated.
So we'll bring that information back.
Right. I want something that
contrast.
shows the difference, because it gets very confusing back and forth. And the other thing, with all due respect to my colleague, I am, if you hear impatience out of me, that I am just channeling what's coming from my district. And my district tells me, because I've only lived in the district since 2002, but my district tells me that They've waited decades, I mean literally decades, for more assistance. The one example would be, and I've told this story over and over again, that the work on Western, when I asked how long it had been for any major work on Western, I was told by the former Public Works Director that their records only went back 35 years, and they could not find any major work on Western in 35 years. But if you talk to people who lived in the community, and I'll mention Lavetta Ricca for one, who's lived there for her whole 70-some years, she will tell you it's been at least 50-some years. So if you hear impatience coming from me, trust that it is me channeling my district, because I'm very close to them. They don't mind telling me in no uncertain terms what they believe. Believe that? Exactly. And I'm sure that they would want me to indicate to you how important this is, how it's been a long time. I mean, 35 years, I mean, that's a long time. 50 years, that's a long time. And so I think they've waited their time in the queue for some real work to happen. And I'm glad to see that under my watch that is happening, although some would say it's not happening fast enough, but I understand things happen the way they need to happen. But that's where that impatience comes from. Thank you.
Councilman Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I forgot to make the most important point from this report earlier. I mentioned what, according to this report, did not work very well. What works the best, according to this report, was job creation credits. Was found to have no significant effect. So, and we all know that. I mean, when I walk around the city of Peoria, everybody's asking for more jobs and better jobs. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Black, I just have a couple comments here to make. I agree with Councilman Sear in being able to quantify what we're trying to solve here with information here. And I guess it kind of brings me back one here. I think we need to have a better definition of what the problem is that we're trying to solve as a council. And I think that will certainly help us. I've heard us, say that we have a stock, but it's not in good shape, for example. But I think if we can really define the problem, we'll be able to come up with a really good solution, and certainly being able to quantify it somehow with number of units, people and or families. And the other one that occurred to me was like age groups. I know there's a group of young graduates out of college who are really in deep debt, not making the dollars that they think they're going to be making or thought that they were going to be making. And I got a feeling that affordable housing hits probably a whole other group that we might not be thinking about. And just a few other follow-ups and questions I had was, I seen a definition for size by number of bedrooms. Does that have a size in square foot by any chance on what is, I seen it go by number of bedrooms. So we had like 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. Is there a size that goes along with that in square foot?
Excuse me, there's not a HUD-defined size, but there are building code requirements for minimum bedroom sizes.
Gotcha. And probably because I watch TV periodically, and I like some of these reality shows. I was watching the one with tiny homes. And I don't know if we have any type of policy where these tiny homes fit in there, but I know it's something that seemed to be intriguing to younger people. And just kind of looking at what the price is for a tiny home, and that might be a solution, and that might fit throughout our city here. I'm not too exactly sure where and how that works, but something that I think is worth some discussion. Also, I seen, take that back. You mentioned briefly about duplexes. I'd like to learn more about that. It seemed like there's a bit that goes along with that. As I read in this report, also, the city owns lots. If we could get the location of where these city-owned lots are at, and also I think I seen vacant lots. I was more interested, probably those in my district, where those vacant lots are at. And lastly, I guess, just thinking back on, I guess, growing up in my home, and I guess my parents got in on a federal program way back in the early 70s, where, and I think this may be going to Denise, and maybe when she's at her national committee, something to discuss. But my parents were able to buy a home by being able to do the finishing up work on the home by painting, fixing the yard, etc., and that was their down payment. It was a whole neighborhood that was built around that. The house cost $18,000 at the time. It's been paid off for many, many years already. My parents still own the home, still live there today, and the houses in that neighborhood overall look really well. So I think that's maybe something to look at, Councilman Moore, if there's a chance for any type of program like that for affordable housing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other one looking to speak, I would say, and I kind of got a few nods when I said within 60 days. I hope that's acceptable to everyone and something that'll give us an opportunity for staff to come back with some more hard information, and also before we get knee-deep in the budget. I would ask everyone to, I know I had a lot of notes, I saw staff taking a lot of notes, but if there's something specifically, even if you mentioned it, just pass it along to Director Black or our Assistant City Manager, just to make sure that the information that you want to see coming back is included when we get back together, okay? So with that, we have a motion to receive and file this report by Councilman Sear and seconded by Councilmember Ali. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
We are at citizens' opportunity to address the city council. We do not have any cards.
Okay, if we have, was there anybody? Yeah, that's okay. Anybody, just go to the center podium there. We need your name, and there's a 5-minute speaking limit. Thank you.
Yes, I'm here to talk about affordable housing. I have many notes like you did, and one of the things I'm wondering about is, let me get my notes together here. The tax TIF, the tax evasion, will they have to pay that back after 10 years? Or it's going to be a higher rate of tax that wasn't high before? That's one of my questions. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the school. If we can implement a program in the schools to teach the children to renovate these houses that's empty on the south side, whether or not they could learn the trades. There's people out there willing to teach them. And then they learn the trade, they get a apprenticeship, and then they become journeymen without trying to leave the program. And then some people don't go to college, so this would be their initiative to work in their own neighborhood and revitalize that neighborhood. There's many, many empty houses there, and there is lack of police seeing the housing there. They're being vandalized. I go around this neighborhood and I see a house that looks like it's being neglected because maybe somebody in there can't cut their grass. So I know that sometimes there's people in there, but they can't do certain things for themselves. It'd be nice if the city had a program that looked in on the people instead of just giving them a bill. Also, I just wanted to know if that is something that the city could do. I don't know if it's with the school district that I need to talk to, or is it something that the city can do? I have 3 more minutes, so There's many other issues that the city is doing that I'm very displeased with. You can't tax the people to death. There's things that needs to be done other than that. They had a paint program years and years ago that helped a lot with my grandfather's house. They came and fixed his house up. He was only man in the house, and he was, I don't know, 70 years old. They came and fixed up his house. That's a good thing. I bought a house. They came and put siding on it and windows. It keeps the houses from going down real fast. And so therefore, I'm thinking that's a good program, and I don't know why it stopped. Maybe money, but there's people out there that need jobs. So therefore, if you took the students from the schools, teach them that kind of thing, they can be the ones help their own neighborhood and their own people. So that's another 2 minutes. Let's see what else I can talk about. Roofs. Main thing that goes wrong with houses is the roof. And once that goes, everything else goes. Because you got the walls falling out and everything else. But like I said, the policing, if they would, I'll just say, when I call the police on certain things that I see, I suspect vandalism is going to take place, or I see vandalism, it's not necessarily the police fault, but the person I get on the phone is very attitude. And so therefore, it's like, it would be an encouragement for people to call the police if they got a reception that is concerned about what's going on. I don't know all the answers to what's going on out there. I just seen something suspicious, but they get suspicious of me calling them. It kind of turns me off. So I just keep an eye on my neighborhood, and I just look around and see different things going on. And it shouldn't only be the citizens that's doing this. It should be the police is ready to come, except for when some violent thing happens, then they come. But this is preventative. It's a lot of preventative things that need to be done. And for the last 38 seconds, as far as somebody mentioned something about the water, the overflow of water. The places that are being built in Dunlap, I was wondering whether or not they are under that rule that their water is not going into the sewer. Are we doing anything? I never heard any solutions to it. I just heard bills, storing water for the rainwater. We're getting that bill, but I don't see anything being said how they're going to solve the problem. 3 seconds. Thank you.
Robin Grantham. I would just like to echo what has already been said when I heard Councilwoman Moore say that there needs to be a real commitment for affordable housing by the city. And with that commitment, also, there's a need for impactful funding. At this stage, I think that everything is on the table, whether that's TIF, bonds, tax abatement. I don't think, or inclusionary zoning. At first, I was sort of disappointed when I heard that inclusionary zoning might be dismissed. I think it's too early to do that, and I was glad that Councilwoman Jensen brought that back to the forefront because inclusionary zoning can be voluntary or it can be mandated. It doesn't have to be mandated. I know that there have been some lawsuits on the mandated inclusionary zoning, and maybe the city might want to take a look at voluntary. Because if there are incentives that a developer has access to from that zoning, they may be interested in doing that. When Councilwoman Moore talked about coming to the South Side in 2002, I found that kind of ironic because today on my computer, as I was going through my documents, I never throw nothing away. I came across the 2002 Affordable Housing Plan by the City of Peoria. and I reviewed that. And so one of the things I would like to see is, has the city reviewed, I mean, every year, I don't know if this is every year or if this is every 5 year, as you prepare for the consolidated plan, that you are putting together an affordable housing plan, that you need to review. What have you done? You know, have you been successful on some things? Are there some things you need to change? Because we have to do more than just create this document. You know, and as you do create a document, it would be great if you put some timelines, you know, with it. Puts, you know, on things that you would like to see completed, and do some timelines for that. And that may be something that is already done. I know Director Black, I remembered with the Spring Grove development that I could have sworn I thought that there were some tax abatements on the table, because I was like, we've done this before. And it seems like in the Spring Grove development, when Diane Cullinan was the developer, the tax abatements were on the table. You're shaking your head, yes. So it's something that we've kind of experimented with. I know that by the time PCCO became the developer, I know they were gone. So I don't know if they were gone because it wasn't attractive enough, but I know that I believe she built 8 of the houses in 7 years, but I know we built like 27 or 28 in the amount of time that we were there, and that was without tax abatement. So I'm just looking forward to the city going forward. We have a great need for affordable housing in our city, and I just would like you to take a look at what you've already done. You know, don't just create this document. See what you've done in the past, compare it with what you're going to prepare now as we go forward. So thank you.
Mr. Kelly, spot on. I really appreciate the fact that you said we need to include the residents, talk to them, let things be naturally developed. We've talked about the tax abatement idea. I would love to learn more. On June 30th from 3 until we get done talking, Urban Acres is hosting an ideation session at our new Springboard Market at 614 Spring Street. This is the kind of things where we need to have community development help develop the community. And since September, I have asked for a meeting in our neighborhood, and we haven't had it. And this is our take on doing that so that we can include the neighbors, so that when residents want development in their community, it's not, to your point, what you believe should happen in that neighborhood, but what that neighborhood believes they can support and that they can do. So we're doing it naturally. I like the idea of tax abatements, you know, because it's coming to my money, but we have a lot of other folks that are moving into the neighborhood and trying to take advantage of good, affordable housing, good neighbors, and building up of a community again. And we haven't had that in our neighborhood in quite a while, of just having the city reach out and actually talk to neighbors. So if we can at least follow through on that, and making sure that the neighbors buy into it as well, and it's not just something else the city says, this is what you get in your neighborhood, take it or leave it. So thank you very much. Again, June 30th, 3 o'clock, I'll send Ms. Ball a notice so that all of you can be invited. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to address the council? Citizens to address? Madam Clerk?
We do not have an executive session, so we would be at adjournment.
We have a motion to adjourn by all council members, seconded by all council members. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Councilman Ruckriegel.